clock here. I'm watching the clock so that I give Brian enough time to talk. And, people knew all my business. They'd meet me in hotels, airports, and ask me questions about the company. And the one answer I always gave when they said, "How's the company doing?" I would say, "Unbelievable." And that shut them up. And of course, that could be taken two ways. So anyway, that was the and obviously as a public company, I can't give out any confidential information that I don't give out to the analysts. So I had the other thing that happened, early employees cashed out because I gave stock options to every single employee in the company, from secretary all the way up to my senior VPs. And that way everybody profited when we had the IPO. And I long anticipated the IPO as our exit because that's when I would get the maximum valuation for the company. So we cashed out. You may remember, so these were the IPO. We did the IPO. We raised 150 million at we raised 58 million at 150 million valuation. So the post money valuation after the IPO was 208 million. And then, of course, we sold the company a few years later for twice that much. So that was a really good profit for everybody. And you can see the actual stock price sold at each round there on that list. So going back, people watch the stock price. It fluctuated. One time it went as low as $8 a share because one of the presidents declared war on somebody. I forget which one it was. I think it was Bush one. He declared war on Iran and on Iraq, and that lowered the stock price. And then people says, "What happened to ViewLogic?" And I says, "Nothing. I'm just riding the roller coaster." So, so that's the way it works. And then there are other issues, day-to-day operations, because I was traveling a lot. We had customers in 28 countries, and I promised to visit every single country every year. So I would make trips. Like one time I made a trip through Europe, 4 countries in one day. I landed in Amsterdam, had a meeting in Dusseldorf, Germany with our distributor, had another meeting in Brussels with another distributor, and had dinner with my distributor in Paris for dinner. So, it was a busy schedule. One time I was stuck in Italy because the airports were, the airport in Milan was fogged in, and, all kinds of stuff happened. So anyway, the major thing was changing the board of directors. Originally, VCs all wanted to be on my board, and then as soon as we went public, they wanted to sell stock, so they wanted to get off the board. So that was, there was transitions as well as for my my employees. Was it worth the price? We did okay on the sale to Synopsys. So I went on and bought myself a racing sailboat with the proceeds. And I've been racing. Actually, I learned to sail in college because, believe it or not, you have to have a sport at MIT to graduate. So I picked sailing because it seemed the less strenuous of all the activities, and have been a lifelong sailor. And here we are. You have 2 Mercury's Cup boats. They're racing against each other. Mine is the one on the right, and the blue and the red one is our favorite competitor. So anyway, after that, I was recruited as CEO at Navigator, which is where I met Brian Mitchell, who I'll introduce next. So at Navigator, I started, we funded a whole bunch of companies. I'll let you read the rest later. I started Insert Software. You can read that later. So, and then I became an angel investor. I started Common Angels with a group of half dozen other senior professionals. And then, who angels are, you can read this later. Why I consider VCs or angels, because you need money. And, just like, if you want to rob banks, that's where they have the money. So you go to VCs or angels. And the last 2 lines are very important. You're not afraid to take advice because they give you lots of it. And you're not afraid to get replaced by a better CEO if they decide you're not the person to do it. Okay. So this is the only technical chart I'll show. And you can see this was a chart we had at Common Angels. that shows you where you are in your likelihood of getting money. So they're parallel. So the vertical axis is management team experience, and the horizontal axis is the status of your product and market fit. And you can have, any percentage of those along the way. And if you have too little of both, you're just not going to get money. If you have a little of both, you'll get friends, families, individuals. If you get more, you'll get angels and some early stage VCs, like Navigator, willing to take a chance on you. Or if you're really, have top management and you have top market product fit proven, then you'll get leading venture capitalists. Okay. So, the ideal venture deal is one where you have a large market, $1 billion or more for sure, team, etc. Some of these things you can read later. And then, so valuing your company, the deal structure is not up to you, it's up to the investors. Okay, so then next gig was Navigator Technology Ventures. I was recruited by Draper Laboratory, one of the MIT spinoffs, itself, to run a venture firm, and ran it from 2001 to 2010 when the financial crisis got him out of the VC business. These are 12 companies that we invested in, and the one I'll highlight is Polychromics, which is a MEMS company. And I was good enough to call in a favor with my CEO, Brian Mitchell. You remember The Godfather? He said, "Someday I'll call you and ask you a favor." And Brian stood up and said, "Okay." So anyway, let me just introduce him. Brian, he's the former CEO of Polychromics. He'll give you all the definites on his career, and I don't have to repeat him again. And after Brian, hopefully we'll have a time for questions and answer. So with that, I'll turn it over. Let me unshare the screen.
All right, Matthew, you'll pull up my deck, please.
Do you see it?
No. There we go. If you can get back to the title slide. There we go. Presentation. Yep. Okay. Thank you, Alan. Appreciate it. It's good to see you again. It's been a number of years. So first of all, please remember here that Polychromics I was there from 2002 to 2010 when we sold the business to Thermo Fisher. So a little bit of this is foggy for me, but I think I've got it directionally correct. I'll talk today really about MEMS from a commercial business perspective. I am not a MEMS technical expert. I'm a chemist by education, but have spent most of my last 40 years in leadership positions in technology-based businesses. They've ranged from 25 to 2,500 employees. I've been associated with 2 startups, 2 growth stage companies, and I spent 6 years as a public company executive vice president and chief operating officer, having sold the first startup I was part of, MIC Technology, to a company called Aeroflex in 1996. So Alan made reference to the roller coaster. You'll see there at the bottom of my slide, it's been 40 plus years of riding roller coasters. There is no better way to describe startups, entrepreneurship, in growth stage companies. So it's full of highs and lows. Next slide, please, Matthew. So Polychromics in its beginnings. Like a lot of tech startups, Poly was launched out of an idea that came out of government-funded research. Dr. Mike Butler was a spectroscopy specialist at Sandia National Laboratories, and DARPA had funded a program at that time. And most of you probably don't remember this, but there was real concerns about weapons of mass destruction based on chemical warfare and warfare agents. And so DARPA funded a project at Sandia National Labs whereby they would create a programmable micro-diffraction MEMS-based spectrometer that would literally sit inside of a soldier's binoculars. So using the binoculars as an optical collection media, using the sun as the illumination, a soldier, without having to get access to an actual sample of the gas in a potential area of theater, would be able to run a series of programmable grading schedules, and would be able to match those gradings to the specific gas that might be in the theater or the area of engagement. So if you're familiar with the Sandia Summit process, it's a polysilicon, more traditional deposition and etch process. But what's unique about it, certainly at the time, is that it allowed you to build MEMS devices with moving mechanics to it, and that was important to the premise of the polychromer that was designed at Sandia. With the program, they reached out to what was at the time one of the world's, I think, leading experts in the field of MEMS, a gentleman by the name of Dr. Stephen Santoria. Stephen was a 40-plus year professor of electrical engineering at MIT. Most universities at the time, and I don't know if this is not still true today, taught off of a textbook written by Dr. Santoria. It was called Microsystem Design. Steve today remains active in the MEMS community, in the microsystem community, giving talks globally. And so he became part of the team with the Sandia group, and began the development phase or prototyping phase in the mid-1990s. By late 1999, they had completed the development of the prototypes of a mid-infrared micro-diffraction grading based on the Sandia Summit process. And the program, in these DARPA programs, they go through funding levels. So you have to present the results. The results let you get the next round of funding. The results were good. They met the criteria of the program. But by the time the first versions of the chip had been developed, the fear of WMDs and poison gas had begun to fade. And with that, the program was mothballed. So next slide, please. By chance, Dr. Santoria's son, Todd, was an investment partner at Bain & Company. And upon learning of the cancellation of the next phase of the project, suggested to his dad that there were probably pretty large commercial opportunities for such a technology that had been developed to that point in time. And Steve actually had started a company previously while still a professor at MIT, had built it and sold it. And so he was familiar with what it takes to get a company off the ground. So he and Dr. Butler took a leave of absence from Sandia, moved to the Boston area. Steve and Mike raised a small round of seed funding. Bain was part of that round. Alan, I don't know if you were in the very first round or if you were in the first round to follow, but
yeah, I was in the seed round because Santoria went to MIT.
Yep. Okay. And so they raised what they needed to get the company started. And I think the investment thesis, and again, this predates me, but the investment thesis was that in roughly 1998, the optical telecommunications bubble had burst. I was part of that at the public company Aeroflex at the time. But in and around 2000, 2001, there was the notion that all the dark fiber that had been laid during the bubble period, there was this phrase that was used, insatiable bandwidth, that you could never put enough fiber in the ground. You would never be able to provide enough bandwidth in the future. And so when the bubble burst, there was certainly the feeling and the expectation that when that market returned and all that dark fiber needed to be lit, it would be done in an all optical domain. Prior to the bubble bursting, a lot of the network functionality was still being done in traditional twisted pair electrical domain. And so things like switching, dynamic gain equalization prior to amplification, reconfigurable optical add drop multiplexing, you had to convert from fiber or from optical to electrical, perform those functions, return to optical. And so the view and the thesis behind polychromics was, if we developed optical subsystems while the bubble, the recovery from the bubble was taking place, the thought is that the company would be very well positioned when people started to light that dark fiber with all optical subsystems. And so that was the premise under which polychromics was founded and was the early stages of the business. Next slide, please. So the Doppler version of the polychromator chip, as I said, modulated in the mid-infrared. So this was going to be standoff remote spectroscopy. It was in the mid-infrared region. And so to take the work that had been done at Doppler and reconstruct or re-architect the MEMS device for telecommunications required that it modulate around 1.5 microns. What you're looking at there is a small section of a chip that would contain thousands of what we refer to as piano keys. So when talking to investors and lay people, the polychromator chip was essentially a micron dimensionalized keyboard, piano keyboard. Consisted of thousands of elements. Those elements were grouped into pixels. And what was unique about the polychromator chip is that each pixel had complete and full analog control. So you could go from complete reflection to complete blocking, and you could modulate anywhere in between. So the seed funding was followed by an A round of funding, which was used for Dr. Centuria and Butler to really bring together a world-class technical team at Polychromics. It consisted of some of Dr. Centuria's best students that had come through his programs. Dr. Butler and Centuria, certainly on their own, were world-renowned in their respective areas. They recruited people like Dr. Richard Payne, Dr. David Day, and they began the work of redesigning the polychromator chip to work at the 1.5 micron target range. Luckily, that was a relatively easy technical lift, because in order to modulate at the lower 1.5 microns in the near infrared required less vertical movement on the piano keys than the actual Doppler chip did. So it was relatively quick. I think it was a total of 2 fab spins in which they were able to build a chip that demonstrated that this concept worked, and that we could build reconfigurable network elements off of this unique MEMS engine. At that point, from a venture capital perspective, put technical risk in the backseat. And allowed the business to start the commercial development of the network elements. So they built the chips. They built that into the first product that you see in the lower right. That's a dynamic gain equalization subsystem. So essentially, prior to going into an erbium amplifier in the optical environment, you have to equalize all of the channels. Otherwise, some channels get more amplification than others. And so the first product envisioned was a DGE, or dynamic gain equalizer. So we built a prototype of that, or they built a prototype of that. They had the chip, they had a foundry. And at that point, the board said it is now time to go get a commercial focused leader for the business to take us into the commercialization phase. I, at the time, had spent the previous 6 years at Aeroflex as chief operating officer. We had sold a microelectronics startup company to them in 1996. We were deeply involved in the electrical domain of optical telecommunications at that point. We were supplying transmit, receive, and amplification modules to all of the major system OEMs, the now, Nortels, Alcatels, Lucents of the world. So I had been part of the building of the bubble. I had spent 4 years opening factories, adding capacity at the speed of light. In the last 2 years, following the collapse of that bubble, I spent closing companies. So as chief operating officer, I was responsible for right-sizing the business post-bubble. I was contacted by Heidrick & Struggles, an executive recruitment firm, and I was eager to get out of the public company domain, get back into the startup environment. And when I looked at the team that had been brought together at Polychromics, my view of the recovery of the optical market was consistent with the investors and with the leadership team at PCX. And so I made the decision to join Polychromics as its president and CEO in 2002. Next slide, please. So coming on board, immediate priorities for CEO of a startup company is to set product and commercial strategy for the business, to create a culture of hard work. All startups, there's no such thing as a 40-hour work week. And so it's to set strategy, develop the culture of the company, but most importantly, as Alan said, it's to raise money. All companies require money. And if you are going to be the CEO of a startup business, you will find probably 60 to 70% of your time throughout the development of the company is spent raising money. Literally, I joined the business on a Monday, and before the end of that week, I was on the West Coast meeting with investors. One of the things over my career, that I have found to be true, that if you are in the startup business and you're going to be in the process of raising money continuously, is what you need is validation of your business concept, the technology, and the opportunity. And the best way for you to get that is to have a beachhead customer who's a top tier potential user of your business, your technology, and your products. And so along with the fundraising activities, my first objectives were to, one, develop a relationship and partnership with a strategic customer, and that came in the form of Siemens Corporation. They were at the lead at the time in working towards all optical telecommunications networks. And the other validation is to bring a strategic investor to your company. And luckily for me, in this case, Siemens Venture Capital filled that role. So during my first many months and year at Polychromics, it was focused on raising money so that the team could be successful in their endeavors. As you can probably imagine, in the world of MEMS, it is not a low-cost endeavor. Each product iteration, each chip iteration requires fab runs, requires post-processing of the chips, and it's an expensive endeavor. And so my job was to provide the capital to the technical team to be successful and to build the commercial or market-facing side of the business. We brought in B and C rounds because we were able to bring a strategic investor and a strategic customer into the Polychromics activities. From 2002, we continued to prototype alpha beta units to test and trial those with all the major network providers and builders, Nortel, Alcatel, Ciena, Fujitsu, and others. We were tested, approved, and we continued to wait for the commercial activity of the company. One thing we could not control was the recovery of the market. And the reality was we were at our B and C round. We had a certain amount of capital left, and we either had to essentially hope that the market would recover consistent with where we were from a financial perspective, because it was going to be difficult in that environment to continue to raise funds, regardless of how good the technical performance of the company was. It was going to be very difficult to continue to raise money around the telecommunications space. Hope isn't a strategy. And so in late 2004, I presented to the board a strategy to pivot and move the company in a different direction. I think the board was unanimously in agreement.
This room needs special attention.
Somebody's okay, in agreement. And so we made the decision to exit the telecommunications space and essentially restart up a startup. Next slide, please. So we've got probably at that point in time somewhere around $12 to $15 million invested in the development of this MEMS technology. So we've got a chip that modulates at 1.5 microns, dead center of the near infrared spectrum. We've got a PhD spectroscopist in Mike Butler. And with the uniqueness of what we had developed around telco, we saw a real opportunity to do something nobody else at the time was able to do, which was to build essentially a solid state miniaturized, very rugged, high performance near infrared spectrometer. And so in early 2005, we began the development of a spectroscopy platform. So essentially what made us different from, say, an FTNIR or an in-gas array based system, scanning monochromator device, is that we were using the MEMS device as essentially a programmable filter. And this allowed us to use a single in-gas detector. When you look at spectrometers today, most of the cost is in the array-based need to use multiple detectors across the wavelength range. So what we could do is we could run the polychromator chip as a programmable filter. We could scan the 900 to 1900 nanometer overtone bands of the near infrared region and capture that on a single detector. At the time, a group at Texas Instruments had done some work around Hadamard transform data processing on their DLP micromirror MEMS device. We incorporated that same approach to how we were going to do the data processing around the unique hardware of the business. And that was what enabled us to launch what we termed the development of digital transform spectroscopy. When we moved out of the telco space and into the spectroscopy space, it was important that we have a commercial team and capability that was consistent with the market we were trying to address. And so I changed the front end of our company. I recruited and hired the VP of Near Infrared Spectroscopy, Sales and Marketing from Brooker, and he joined us in 2005. And we began the development of applications for the hardware platform. In spectroscopy, it is really a lot less about the hardware itself. It's a lot more about the applications that you're able to develop and able to run on your hardware. Next slide, please. So with the launch of DTS, as I said, in the telco space, what you need to do to be able to continue to raise money and validate the business thesis and the technology is to have a strategic investor and a strategic customer. We were presenting the DTS platform at a PitCon conference, and at that conference, we had visits from investors from a group called In-Q-Tel. If you're not familiar with In-Q-Tel, they are the venture capital arm of the US government's three-letter agencies. So they explore, uncover, and invest in technologies that help CIA, FBI, DHS, ATF, and other three-letter agencies perform their duties. In polychromics and in DTS, they saw the possibility of portable spectroscopy that would allow their agents to be able to do things like narcotics identification, explosives detection, and other applications. And so we worked with In-Q-Tel on a round of funding. So they represented the strategic investor. We brought some venture debt to the business at that time with this investment. And what was really important here is that we have a product that could be used by non-technical people in the field. So an agent, not a chemist, not a physicist, but an agent, and be able to do rapid real-time analysis of materials, and to be able to get an answer out of that process. So not having to run chemometric processing on things. And so all of that became central to the development of what we came to call the polychromics handheld analyzer in the infrared, or phaser. And the first version of the phaser was a 4-pound handheld device, battery operated, embedded chemometrics. And what that allowed us to do was to do very rapid, less than 1 second analysis of unknown materials in the field and provide an answer to the user. And Dan Clevershaw, who was the VP that I had recruited out of Brooker at the time, had actually been working on an application for the carpet industry. And so waste carpet represents about 8% of solid landfills in the United States. And so there was a real big push by the major manufacturers to move waste carpet from going into landfills and going into a recycling process. All plastics recycle differently. And so Brooker had been approached by Shaw, the largest carpet manufacturer in the world, to develop a near-infrared platform that would help them to be able to quickly classify the different waste carpets, nylon 6, 6, polyethylene, polyester, and be able to put them into the appropriate recycling streams. It represented for us a great commercial entry point because it was a relatively easy application for the phaser, and it was quickly adopted and really represented the first commercial success and put polychromics in a position of being viewed as an advanced spectroscopy company. We followed that with applications development around things like, as I said, explosives detection. We sold almost 100 phasers into the Mexican government. They were using those at their points of entry into the country. A lot of people would deliberately mislabel materials to carry a lower tariff level. An example, they would say a fabric bolt was polyester when in fact it was silk. Polyester carries a lower tariff value. They needed the ability to do real quick, rapid identification of these materials to determine if they were being tariffed appropriately. And what really I think moved us to the next level in terms of our commercial enterprise is we moved into the field of pharmaceutical raw material testing. The paradigm at that time was that raw material inert ingredients as well as active ingredients were warehoused. The CFR compliance process requires that a certain amount of that material is taken from the warehouse to a lab, is validated for purity and for a proper labeling, and then that lot of material can be released to the production process. It was time consuming, it's expensive. You have to actually open the drums of materials, breach the internal bags. And what we developed was a CFR 21 compliant device where in the warehouse, the operator would simply remove the lid from the barrel and be able to test the materials directly through the bags. So near infrared gave you the ability to test through packaging. And that set us off on development of this marketplace with all the major global players, Teva, GSK, Pfizer. There on the lower right, you see a red circle around one of the Pfizer scientists holding the phaser device. So they had moved from laboratory compliance testing to in-warehouse phaser-based testing earlier than most other players. Next slide, please. So we continued to develop the commercial side of the business. Our applications team grew. We were always working on new applications, new market verticals. You'll see that the company and the product received a number of awards around the spectroscopy industry and innovation industries. We continue to evolve based on the input from our customers, the second generation of the product. A lot of what we were doing was requiring that we be able to access the entire near-infrared range to do things like mixture analysis, not pure material identification, but mixture analysis. And so the microphaser, we reduced the size of the spectrometer, we reduced the weight of the spectrometer, we added a hot swap battery capability so you didn't have to recharge the whole device, you could simply swap out the battery. We put things like audible alarms in the system, secondary display on the back so you could shoot a material. You don't have to tilt the device, look at the top of it for the answer. And what I should say is all of the raw spectra was captured and saved in this device. And so customers who had internal laboratories could access that and do whatever additional processing work they needed to do. But what was most important about the microphaser is that we added a single cooled in-gas detector, and now our device covered the entire combination bands as well as first and second overtones of the near-infrared, all the way from 900 to 2400 nanometers. This gave us the equivalent performance of an FTNIR device in a ruggedized solid-state system, which was not subject to vibrational issues and problems. So it was really a market-changing technology and device at the time. We were at a second PitCon conference, and we were approached by Boeing engineers. They were in the process of releasing the 787 Dreamliner aircraft. If you're familiar with that, that's an all-carbon composite airframe, moving away from an aluminum airframe. I didn't know this at the time, but commercial aircraft get hit quite often by lightning in flight. With metal aircraft, it's not really a problem. It dissipates the electrical charge, but in carbon fiber, it absorbs the electrical charge. And so what Boeing needed was a device that would allow an aircraft that had been struck by lightning to analyze the area that had been struck to determine whether there was damage to the underlying carbon composite frame so that it could essentially be cut out and replaced. And so we spent about a year with Boeing developing an application around that. That application and this device were written into the owner's manual for the Boeing 787. And I don't know how to prove it today, but I believe it's still a core technology to the platform. Next slide, please. You talk about entrepreneurship and some of the things it allows you to do. So some of Dr. Butler's associates at Sandia had moved from Sandia to NASA. At the time, there was a project, a program at NASA that sought to answer the question about whether or not there was water on the surface of the moon. Someday, if we looked to colonize the moon and put people and have the ability to live on the moon, it was important to know whether or not there was water to sustain that. And so there was a mission in the late 2000s called LCROSS. And LCROSS was a mission to answer that question. Essentially, it was a two-stage rocket. The first stage would be jettisoned to the dark side of the moon to what was called the Cerberus crater, which doesn't see sunlight. And that first stage would be an impact device that would go into the Cerberus crater, create a huge dust plume, and following behind the first stage was the second stage, which had a payload of analytical instrumentation on it. On that was two near-infrared spectrometers that had been built by Polychromics around the DTS platform. And that second stage would follow the first stage through the plume, real-time transmitting data, spectral data back to NASA. That data would then be later analyzed, and then that payload would also impact the moon. So it was a one-time mission. We had one chance to get it and get it right. If the two spectrometers from Polychromics didn't work, it was many, many years of work and millions of dollars investment for nothing. They worked flawlessly. It took several months for the team at NASA to analyze all of the data, but it was answered in the affirmative. That was there's absolutely water on the surface of the moon in the form of ice crystals, and more of it than anybody had actually previously thought before that. So it was a really cool project. It helped us continue to evolve our core technology. Obviously, it wasn't a big commercial project, but it was something that allowed us to continue to evolve the technical performance of our product. Next slide, please.
Brian, you have 8 minutes left.
Yep, I've got my timer on here, Alan. You took 2 of mine. In 2010, Thermo Fisher came back to Polychromics. They had come to the company in 2008 with a desire to acquire the company. In 2010, we sold the business to Thermo Fisher Scientific. They had previously acquired a handheld X-ray fluorescence company called Niton and a handheld Raman spectroscopy company called Ahura. PCX essentially filled out that portable spectroscopy division. It ended up being about a $250 to $300 million division at Thermo Fisher. It remains today. I will only say in retrospect, certainly the team at Polychromics was not the largest group I've ever worked with, but they were by far the smartest and most innovative group of people I've ever had the pleasure to work around. We did some really cool, really neat things. It was like every day, it was a new advancement. It was fun to get up every day, and it was fun to go to bed every night knowing something new that I didn't know the morning before. And so that little saying at the bottom is actually from a fortune cookie I got with dinner one night, which is the person who says it cannot be done should not interrupt the person doing it. And that was certainly the culture and mentality at Polychromics. Next slide, please. And I'll make these really quick. So I look at my career, as I said, I'm a chemist by education, public university. When I look at my career, I've been very, very fortunate to do a lot of different and very cool things. So when I chunk my career up, my first phase after university was really around material science. I worked as a research chemist for a while, but had a real desire to move more into the customer-facing side of business, and pretty early on moved into technical applications and then into sales engineering with a couple of major chemical companies. Olin owned a division called Ciba-Geigy, which was semiconductor process chemistry. That took me into the second phase of my career, which was semiconductors and microelectronics. I became part of a startup out of Richardson, Texas called MIC Technology, building thin film microelectronic devices. I started as a sales engineer, eventually became the president and CEO, reporting to the board. We grew it from, I was, I think, the 8th employee to 400 employees before we sold it to Aeroflex in 1996. As I said there, I spent 6 years as a public company EVP and COO. They are so different from startups. You're either a big company person or a small company person. I am definitely a small company person. I like the pace of things in small companies. But that time at Aeroflex then positioned me to move into MEMS and spectroscopy at Polychromics, which I've already talked about. And then from my time at Polychromics, I've now spent the last 15 years running 2 analytical sciences companies, Spectro Scientific, which I joined in 2011 as the chairman, president, and CEO. We sold that to Amatec in 2018. A very successful private equity-backed investment. And from there, I joined KPM Analytics, where today I'm on the board and I'm president and CEO. Next slide, please. I won't go through these, but I'm today, I think, like Alan, an active investor in early stage, mid stage companies. I sit on a number of boards and have had the opportunity to just really experience industry from a lot of different perspectives. I have friends who've been very successful in large companies where they've spent their entire career. And I consider myself to be very, very fortunate to have had the different experiences that I have. Last slide, and I will cut it at 38 minutes. My lessons from my career in technology entrepreneurship, right, is that every day is both exhausting and invigorating. As we said, it is a roller coaster ride. You go from being at the top of the mountain to the bottom of the valley over and over and over again. As you become more experienced at this, one of the biggest things you can do for your team is to set that expectation. We're going to have wins and we're going to have setbacks. So you've got to build a culture that embraces failure. What you need to do is you need to fail quickly. Failing quickly, it's a cycle of learning thing. We always refer to baseball, even the best hitters miss 70% of the time. And so expect that you're going to have your failures. You're going to learn from them. Just don't do it twice. Not all money is the same. We think all cash is green. Not the case. You're going to be really careful in choosing the right partners to grow your business with. Be honest in your own self-assessment. What are you good at? What do you need smarter people than yourself to surround you with to have the team to be successful? And you have to be prepared to make decisions with incomplete data. You're never going to have everything you would like to have to make a decision. You have to trust your gut, make those decisions, and move the business forward. Venture capital and private equity works at a different velocity than established companies. And Alan said this in his slide as well, which is you can never raise or have too much money in a startup or growth stage company. And with that, thank you for the time.
I think we have a time for one question or two. Dr. Wang, would you select the lucky person?
I would recommend Bazu. He's an entrepreneur in training now.
Yeah.
He raised a hand already.
Yes. Thank you so much for the presentation. I have several questions, but the main one that if you could quickly go through is, when you were trying to raise the seed round, what were the investors were looking for in the company? Like, what would constitute a successful seed round in, for example, polychromics? Then,
Are you in terms of the round, the size of the round, or the people that we would bring in as seed investors?
yeah, so I was thinking, is it about the MVP that is working, or is it about the people that you will bring in that will constitute the investor to invest? Or
Yeah, I think Alan touched on it. Without a doubt, the pedigree of the team that starts the company and that you've identified you are going to retain, and the group that you're going to build the company with the seed and then a round of financing are critically important. Obviously, it's going to be a big, attractive market, but the team is number one.
oh, okay, thank you. And also, could you a little bit touch more on the differences between the public company that you mentioned you switched to private startup? What would cause you to make that decision? How is that different?
Well, in the public company, you have a 90-day life. You live quarter to quarter to report to the public markets, and so that's the time frame in which you get to make decisions and your strategic roadmap. And so it is really, it can be, you spend more time servicing the organization than you do the customers and in building the longer term roadmap. At least that was my experience. I don't know if it was the same for Alan, but having to sit through quarterly investor calls, make sure you deliver every single quarter. You can't really invest out into the 1 and 2 year time frame. Made it pretty frustrating for me.
Yeah,
Okay.
same here.
Also, do you also consider grants for the seed money round, or for example, now SBIR fundings are available? I don't know if those times were also available.
They are available, and actually we availed ourselves of that at Spectro Scientific. We took several SBIR projects that supported the Department of Defense and development of some technologies around industrial fluid analysis, predictive maintenance based on industrial fluid analysis. So absolutely, they are a source of money. I think what's important to understand, though, is they can't be your only source, because the A round is going to quickly follow the seed round, and the B and C round are quickly going to follow the A round. It's not until you get into really later stage D, E round funding where you're able to raise the levels of funds, generally the level of funds that you're going to need, that you're not in the constant fundraising mode.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Professor Wang, you want to direct the rest of the meeting?
Nazir is today's host. Nazir, you're muted. Nazir, you're
Sorry for
muted.
that. Yeah, sorry. Well, thank you, Peggy. So I think we can move to the next speaker, right?
Thank you so much, Brian and Alan.
Thank you, everybody. I
Excellent.
appreciate the time. Thank you much. Good luck.
Yeah. Thank you. So our next speaker, I believe, Tommy Martindale from SDSU. So it's my pleasure to introduce Tommy, a leader in technology transfer and innovation commercialization. Tommy serves as the Director of Technology Transfer Office at San Diego State University, where he oversees the protection and licensing of faculty-developed intellectual property. His work is instrumental in evaluating the patentability and market potential of inventions and advancing SDSU innovation toward real-world applications. Tommy is a licensed attorney and a registered patent practitioner with the United States Patent and Trademark Office, bringing a strong legal foundation to the innovation ecosystem. He also contributes to entrepreneurship education as part of teaching team of the NSF-funded CSU Biological Sciences I-Corp site, helping researchers translate scientific discoveries into market-ready solutions. Additionally, Tommy recently served as president of the San Diego Innovation Council, reinforcing his commitment to fostering regional innovation and university-industry collaboration. So please join me welcoming Tommy Martindale for his presentation.
Good morning. It's my pleasure to be here. So I'll add just a little bit of color to my background just for your reference, which is I started my career in medical diagnostics and then working at a pharma company before going to law school. During law school, I worked in the corporate legal department at Qualcomm, and then over time transitioned into using my intellectual property skills to manage the portfolio here at San Diego State and help with getting those innovations out of the lab and into the market. And so as we talk about intellectual property today, a lot of that will be through the lens of an entrepreneur or somebody in industry or in tech transfer. I mean, interests are oftentimes aligned with looking at how to protect these things that are valuable, and how to kind of identify that, and then how to strategically think about the process. So as I go through, don't hesitate to stop me if you have questions. I'll try to pay attention to the chat, or hands if somebody just wants to kind of alert me verbally, that's also fine. And so fundamentally, intellectual property rights are exclusionary rights. They give you the opportunity to stop somebody else from doing something. And so like in the case of a patent, from making, using, or selling or importing your invention. In the case of copyright, from copying your creative work, which can include source and object code and software, so still relevant to technology. From using your brand in the case of a trademark. And you can have a whole portfolio of these types of protection, and we'll go into each one, but we're going to kind of focus on why they're important. And before I jump into this about tech transfer, so those exclusionary rights can be really important in terms of your ability to stop somebody else from making, using, or selling your invention. Because if you think about what your competition might be, and those really well capitalized Fortune 50 type companies, what's going to stop them if you're an entrepreneur or if you're working in academia and you have an early stage innovation? What's going to stop them from doing what you're doing? What's going to stop them from making your invention or something that's really similar? And if you're not able to do that also as an entrepreneur, it sounds like you just had somebody kind of talking about their entrepreneurial journey and raising capital and things like that. If you don't have these exclusive rights, then it can be really hard to raise capital, right? If you can't, if you're going to get asked by investors, what's going to stop, Google or whatever Fortune 50 company from just coming right in and doing exactly what you're doing? Why would we invest in you? It can be important to think this out. But at the same time, patent protection can be quite expensive. So there's kind of a strategic way at the early stage that you can hold open as many opportunities for protection as possible without deferring the time at which the cost kind of balloons. And then in tech transfer, we are again looking at those innovations that result from your research and trying to help with a commercial pathway forward. And so for the same reasons, that all those stages of follow-on funding, whether it's it's moving from your fundamental research funding to more kind of translational funding to maybe spinning out a company and pursuing SBIR, SETR funding, and then moving on to venture capital. Along that continuum to keep moving forward, it's important to think about how you're going to protect those innovations and have that portfolio to license if you want to go spin a startup out or license to industry. And at the same time, think about the industry problem that you're solving and aligning the protection with that. So there's kind of this continuum. This slide's just about the Bayh-Dole Act, which that moved the ownership of federally funded research-based inventions from the federal government to the contracting party. So usually, the university that's receiving those federal funds, and basically created the technology transfer profession in 1980 is this bipartisan legislation that's stuck around. And this is a dated slide, but just kind of highlights some of that impact. These are, there's been 200 plus drugs and vaccines, for example, that have come from that. But really, almost all of the therapeutics that have come to market have benefited in some way from federally funded research, even if the intellectual property wasn't directly tied to an academic institution, because oftentimes, like a target for a vaccine or for a therapeutic oftentimes has its genesis in academic research. So in tech transfer, there's kind of 4 things that are happening in parallel, and 3 of these things, if you're a startup, are potentially happening too, which is there's technical de-risking. So you've got this great creative early stage idea, and there's technical milestones along the way that you're going to have to do to prove out that innovation, that it can work in a commercial product. And there's kind of a continuum of that. And then, of course, that would include de-risking that's associated with regulatory pathways. If you have in MEMS, certainly, and Professor Kissen has been in the space. If you have an implantable or some other biocompatible or potentially biocompatible material, something like that, you're going to have a longer pathway, but those can be really high value assets. Obviously, there's kind of the business de-risking. So is the commercial problem that you're pursuing big enough, or do you have to pivot, and how do you make those decisions? And then contemporaneously, you're managing the intellectual property. And something that we'll come back to, a couple times, if you take nothing else away as somebody coming out of academia and into industry or wanting to move innovations out of the lab and into the market, think about your IP protection before you publicly disclose your innovation. So if you're going to submit a journal article, you're going to go publicly disclose through an open forum like a conference or whatever it might be that's publicly accessible, and you want to share that great idea and you want to share those results. If you're going to make an enabling disclosure, then if you're at a university, consult with your technology transfer office. If you're in industry, consult with your corporate legal team. If you're an entrepreneur, think about if you need to engage outside counsel or what other steps that you might take to protect that invention before the public disclosure. And that's really kind of the first engagement. We'll talk about the types of patent applications and so forth, but there's an inexpensive tool called a provisional patent application that's a really common first step, and that in academia we file a real lot of, because they can be filed somewhat quickly and cheaply, just to make sure we get ahead of that public disclosure. Because when you make that public disclosure, in most countries, you're deemed to have given the invention away and can no longer protect it. In the United States, there is a 1-year grace period for your own public disclosure. We don't really want to rely on that. And for certain types of innovations, it can be really important to get protection outside the United States too. And then the last thing is BIDOL compliance. So we get to, we in tech transfer are consistently needing to update the sponsoring agency with what's going on with patent cases that result from federally funded research. And the sponsoring agency is next in line to own that invention. And something else backing up to the Bayh-Dole Act that's really important to know, we share at universities, and we're required by law to share a proportion of our revenue from licensing. So if we go and license your patent to Johnson & Johnson, and we're receiving $1 million a year. At San Diego State, we share 50% of the net royalties. That's about as generous as I'm aware of in terms of the inventor share at a public research university. There's a few others that I know that share 50-50. Probably anything between 25% and 50% is common. And in the UC system, for example, it's 35%. And then you might see places with more concierge style technology transfer offices sharing maybe like 25%. But we have to keep making these decisions throughout the course of the patent, and where there's kind of escalating costs, and we'll talk about that as we get into the process more. But if we decide at some point, okay, we just don't see how this is going to get to the market, we might then waive our rights to NSF or whoever the sponsoring agency is, and then they have the opportunity to take that forward, and they also would pay a share of royalty if they decided to do that and then successfully got it licensed. Something that I always want to point out to researchers is how critical you are to having your innovations have a commercial impact. It's really not the case that you can just drop off a napkin drawing with us and then the next day we deliver a big paycheck. I wish it could be that way, and I mean, maybe there's some N of 1 type examples out there of something like that happening. But usually with this deep technology that takes lots of de-risking, it's an ongoing partnership with the team of the folks with the business expertise, the folks with the intellectual property expertise, and the folks with the technical expertise to really hammer out, how is this valuable? How is this going to solve a big and important problem? Aligning that patent protection, and then oftentimes the industry relationships, if you're going to IEEE or whatever your kind of conference circuit is in your particular space, you might be the one, the researcher might be the one that breaks through, that kind of gets those conversations going, because you've been talking about your results for some period of time with your colleagues in the space. So even at kind of concierge style tech transfer offices like University of Florida, MIT, Oak Ridge Labs, et cetera, they published their results, and 56% of their licensing leads came from faculty. So I suspect in small tech transfer offices, which are actually most of them, which based on the Association of University Technology Managers definitions means 6 or fewer employees. That is most of them. I suspect this proportion is higher. And then just another thing to keep in mind is a real lot of these opportunities need a startup as the vehicle for that initial de-risking. So this just kind of illustrates the gap that can happen where your federal funding results in some discovery. Maybe you get some more translational type of funding that's a little bit more applied, still might be from a federal source, for example. And then there's a gap where you need to prove the thing out more to be able to attract capital from, say, an angel investor, venture capitalist, or to get a big private or a big publicly traded company to really be interested in taking on your thing. Some of them will come in quite early, and in life science, I would say that that is more common than in some other spaces. But just, think about the presentation that you just had and how slow those folks are to make decisions and how everything's about ROI. And so anything that's early stage is a little bit more high risk. And so for them to really change their process, then you have to really have that technology pretty matured, have the business case be pretty de-risked for them to want to dive in. So sometimes, you really need that startup as a vehicle to attract funding and to do those next steps and then become competitive with that company, and maybe you get acquired. And I can say, like in the tech transfer space, most of the licenses that we have with really big companies, it's because a startup got acquired. It's not because of the direct license. I mean, certainly those happen, but even we've poached some of my colleagues from Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation, WARF, the tech transfer arm of University of Wisconsin-Madison, or UC San Diego, who has $2 billion in research expenditures. That's also the case there. It's not a unique thing to San Diego State. Most of their big licenses are because a startup got acquired. So you might need it. And then most of your universities might also have a proof of concept fund. We have one at San Diego State. About 100 universities have that. There's a specialized conference annually for this gap. And so we invest our proportion of royalties that we receive in the Division of Research and Innovation, which is 15% of the total royalties here at San Diego State. We invest all of that in de-risking, so amounts up to about $50,000. If you need to make a prototype or whatever that thing is that's identified as the gap that's going to help you get to that next inflection point in value. And so, we're hoping that you go through, say, a program like National Science Foundation Innovation Corps, which Sam Kassen, who's on the line and invited me to speak, has gone through, and I think hopefully was one of the things that has influenced his kind of pathway towards success right now in his company. So thinking about what's that commercial problem that I'm solving, what's the feedback from the market that might dictate that I do something a little bit differently or not. And that might lead you to a little pivot, but that tiny little pivot can be the difference between success and failure. So just in terms of thinking about those things that are happening in parallel, at the bottom of your screen, and it looks kind of small, but we'll come back to the usual pathway that universities and life science companies or deep tech companies are going after patent protection is starting with that provisional patent application that lasts 12 months. Then escalating costs, you go to what's called a patent cooperation treaty application. That holds open your opportunity to file in all of the signatory countries. I think there's about 160 of them. We'll show a map of that later. And then where the cost really explodes is where you get to the 2.5-year mark. And that's where you have to choose which countries you're going to go into. You could spend tens of thousands of dollars in each of them. So you want to selectively choose those markets that are really important in tech transfer. If we don't have something licensed where an outside company is going to absorb the cost, probably we're just going to go after the United States. In many cases, that is the largest market and is still sufficient for success. But there's some cases like in consumer electronics or in drugs where it's really nice to also have Europe, Korea, Japan, et cetera. But just thinking about that in terms of also the escalating value that comes with your technical de-risking. So this chart shows kind of your revenue opportunity against these different technical milestones using this federal technology readiness levels of 1 through 10. Most things that we deal with, like when they come to us in tech transfer, are a 1 through 3. So not more than like a prototype. And then, the idea is somewhere around the 4 or 5, we're hopefully transitioning that to a company that can kind of take that on the steeper inflection of value once we've identified a commercial pathway forward. But as you're making those technical developments, it's important to partner together so that we can protect those updates that might be really critical as you're kind of learning what's going to work, both technically what's going to work and from a business perspective what's going to work. Yeah, and then so again, using that feedback loop of what's called either a customer discovery process or learning interviews, to kind of really understand the market need, what are going to be the requirements of a licensee who might take a license to your invention, and making sure that those things get into the patent protection can be really critical. And from a de-risking standpoint, use that same process to figure out, we call it sometimes the killer experiment. So what is, and it might be a little bit different from the things that are of interest in the literature. There might be some way that your thing integrates with an existing product, and you might need to prove that that will work in the system of the licensee, or but whatever that milestone is, you want to use this process to have those conversations and be sure before you start spending money on it. And investors will want to see that evidence too, most likely, before they write a check. And so, you know, again, just really quickly, your university gap funds, if you have one, you know, we launched ours in 2021. We've actually attracted more capital than this now already, I learned, but ours has been really successful, and the overall statistics tell us that there's about a 19-to-1 capital attraction return. So that measures capital raised by spin-out companies, research funding that comes in as that kind of next tranche of funding, royalty revenue, all of those things. But these tend to be really impactful investments if they're invested wisely. We use an outside evaluation panel of industry experts who make recommendations to the university which ones to fund. Another place to kind of get that gap funding can be industry sponsorship. So if you identify a specific pain point for industry, then you know, if you can solve a technical problem for them, they might be interested in sponsoring your work, and then oftentimes they would have the first option to license resulting invention. So if you achieve a milestone for them that's important, they might take an option to license, and then you might be able to get royalty revenue from that. SBIR and STTR funding. So if you have lineage with a particular agency, I would certainly be looking, if you're interested in pursuing entrepreneurial opportunities, in small business innovation and research funding, small business technology transfer funding. These are awards usually of, say, up to about 250,000 for the first phase and up to more like 2 million for the second phase. And these are non-dilutive, they're grants, but they go to a company, or in the case of an STTR, Small Business Technology Transfer Research Grant, those go partially to a company and have to have a university partner. So if you know that you want to do some of the work at a university lab, then oftentimes you are more competitive for those grants too, because SBIRs, a small business is just defined as any business effectively with less than 500 employees. Even Illumina and huge companies here in San Diego have won lots of SBIRs before they grew to their current size. So small is not that small, and so those can be highly competitive. But if you know you can have an academic partnership, there's going to be fewer applicants for those same size of awards, and typically they give quite a few of them. That might change into the current administration, and that's still kind of shaking out, so something to keep an eye on. But historically, if you could qualify for STTR, it's been the better pathway for it. All right, so now diving more into the nuts and bolts, but just wanted to lay the foundation for why these things are important, and kind of how to think about when to do things, and you know, just kind of your approach. So patents, again, these are going to protect the functional elements of your inventions. In the case of utility patents, there's also something called the design patent, which is more like a copyright and lasts for a little bit shorter period of time. Copyrights protect your creative works. Trademarks protect your indicators of origin or brands, your logos, things like that. Trade secrets are information that's valuable because it's secret. It's a body of contract. And we'll talk about why you would choose that versus a patent, because patent applications do publish. In academia, we're not necessarily thinking about that as much, but because you're going to probably publish in a journal, for example, and you might do that before the 18-month delay that happens when you file a patent application until it publishes. But for industry, it's a big consideration. Do I want this out in the public? Is it worth it to get a 20-year monopoly that I can enforce through the courts to stop my competition from making, using, selling my invention? Or are they going to not find a way to reverse engineer this thing within 20 years, and should I keep it secret instead? And then again, single product might have overlapping protection. So if you think about your smartphone, I'm sure everybody has one of these around. When I was at Qualcomm, they had a patent wall of 49,000 or so patents, and that was in 2009. I can only imagine how many international patents they have at this time. And many of those being for chipsets, antennae, things like that. So you have those functional elements inside here, probably also on numerous types of the material that are in here, and batteries, all of that kind of thing. And they might also be standards essential, so tied into a body of 5G, where there's many different companies that are a part of a standard. The apps that are in there, the source and object code, can be protected by copyright or can be kept trade secret. Apple is considered a particularly strong trademark. So kind of the more arbitrary the mark is, or the logo or term, the less it has to do with what the goods are, the stronger it is. If something's descriptive of goods, then it's not very strong. So you have just a huge bundle of things wrapped up in one product. In your initial product as a startup, you might not have everything that's here in an iPhone, but you might touch on all of these types, and that bigger that portfolio it is, the more opportunity that you have to exclude, just the more protection and value both you can have. So again, they're exclusionary rights. And just like real property, it's kind of like building a fence around your idea. So we kind of talked about these, talked about the overlapping rights. So copyrights are in some ways a simple one. In practice, it can become much more nebulous, but the key thing to know is you don't have to register a copyright for it to exist. Once your work is fixed, your original work is fixed in a tangible medium, you have protection from that time forward. There's an international treaty where there's reciprocity with most countries for that. I think the biggest industrialized country that's not a signatory is Iran. They are a signatory of the Patent Cooperation Treaty, but I think not of the Convention for Copyrights. But it also lasts for the life of the longest living author plus 70 years. So you don't really have to be particularly concerned with expiration. Instead, what tends to happen with these is just that there's consistent updates. And then registration is required if you want to go and sue to enforce. But you're just thinking about all those creative works, and sorry, fixed in a tangible medium, that's the legal phrase, but that's kind of like when you put pen to paper or when you write up that code on your computer. It exists from that time. There are benefits to registration. It puts the public on notice. There's additional damages that you can get when you sue to enforce somebody who has copied your work. But again, just for engineers, the key thing here is software. So source and object code that can be protected this way. There might be aspects, for example, of user interface and things like that you might try this with. Design patents can also potentially help with that kind of thing. But those things are such moving targets that it can be a challenge to keep up with, candidly. So again, back to trade secrets, they are really a body of contracts. So if you're going to share, confidential information or a trade secret with somebody else, it's good to have a confidential disclosure agreement. If you're a startup, key thing is to have employment agreements or agreements with your founders that these things are owned by the company and that they stay confidential. There's some resources in this slide deck, which I'm happy to have shared with you folks, where you can see some examples of these. There's an intellectual property law firm called Cooley that released a bunch of their forms on a website called Cooley Go, if you want to see some examples. I do recommend, if you're a startup, getting good counsel. And I have seen bad things happen with folks who have used LegalZoom or equivalents of LegalZoom that are out there. Like recently, I saw some founder agreements that didn't have an assignment of rights for the intellectual property, and then there was a dispute over ownership of intellectual property among the founders just before they were about to get an investment. So, attorneys can be expensive. Good attorneys are expensive, but the consequences of not having them can be much worse. So just keep in mind, and we can talk more, or I'm happy to field questions about kind of how to manage that cost. But again, those agreements can be, or you need to take reasonable steps to protect a trade secret in order to keep it secret, and show that in court if you ever have to kind of enforce one. So some of the key examples, the KFC recipe of the original spices, the recipe for Coca-Cola, which many folks have tried to knock off. Royal Crown Cola, I think, has most conspicuously done that and gotten close. But there's something in their process that they've been able to keep secret, where nobody's been able to just really perfectly duplicate the flavor. The formulas for WD and Listerine, and then other things that are just information that are probably not, something that you would also think about getting a patent on, like customer lists, or nowadays data is becoming it in itself a really valuable asset. So just using contracts to kind of manage that can be important. Trademarks, again, are your brand designs. I won't spend too much time, but the distinctiveness is the key thing that makes them more valuable and protectable. So again, the more descriptive something is, and I won't walk through all these examples, the more descriptive something is, the less likely you are able to get trademark protection for something, versus if it really has nothing to do with the goods, then it's much more easy to protect. And you can do a search on your own to kind of see what's out there using the TESS function, TESS function of the USPTO website if you want to see ones that are registered, and kind of make sure that you're not using a confusingly similar brand and you might have an opportunity to protect it. So patents are going to be the meatiest topic. The key things with being able to obtain a patent is that your invention is new, it's useful, it's non-obvious, it's patent eligible subject matter, and then it's adequately described. The last part kind of leave to patent attorneys. So the key ones are in red here, and we call them art-based considerations because you're looking at what we in the law call prior art, but it's the whole body of published knowledge, okay? And so we would say your invention lacks novelty if you could find a single reference that fully discloses every element of your invention. We'll talk about some of the sneaky types of prior art that you might not be thinking about coming up. Utility in the United States is quite a low threshold. Really, we let the market bear that out. There has to be credible utility. So if you say you have a cure for cancer, better have evidence of that. But in general, not really a huge consideration. And outside of the United States, this requirement's often called industrial applicability. But if you're solving some kind of industry problem, this is probably going to be met. Non-obviousness is the most nebulous kind of concept here, but the question here is, would a person of skill in the art, so somebody of similar technical skill to you, have found it obvious to combine already publicly known elements, so combine, say, a couple of different scholarly references or published patent applications, and arrive at your invention? And they need to have a motivation to do that should be explicit in the art, but there's a little bit of wiggle room there. And this is the area that your patent attorneys are really going to earn their money. As you go through the process and you file a patent application, it gets examined by the patent office. You get that first examination report or office action. It's not uncommon for you to get, especially like in life science areas or in other high publication areas, to get an obviousness rejection on the first time, even for things that are eventually going to get allowed, because a patent examiner has 6 to 8 hours to get your case off their desk. And if you get a pretty junior one, the first time they're not going to feel super comfortable. And the other thing that happens is patent attorneys are trained to claim your invention in the broadest possible way, and then respond to the office action. So if you get a lot of these obviousness rejections your first time, you shouldn't panic. There's opportunities to amend your claims. There's opportunities to make arguments, and it's kind of like a negotiation with the examiner to get that claim language that describes what the invention is you can protect, to get that right and get that in condition for allowance. And it's not uncommon for there to be like 2, 3, 4 rounds of that, depending on what the art area is. And there's also analytics now where you can see how difficult your examiner is, like what their allowance rate is compared to their art unit. So that can kind of tell you, am I dealing with a difficult person? Because there's the human element also. But if you work with a good patent attorney, there's a variety of ways of dealing with that. But what I'd kind of say here is this is kind of thinking about how novel is it? How much of an inventive step was there? Is it a really kind of trivial difference compared to the prior art, or is this a more significant inventive step? And so there's kind of a risk spectrum here. If there's an explicit articulation of why you would combine these different references to arrive at the invention, yeah, that's going to be more challenging, versus, if the elements are out there, but there's not, like a clear reason that somebody would have thought to combine them, you can generally make arguments to kind of defray that, but it might take, some back and forth with the examiner, including an examiner interview, which you're entitled to have one of in the process. So patent eligible subject matter has become over time a sticky issue. It used to be the case that if you fit into one of these statutory categories, that was it. So if you had a new and useful process, machine, article of manufacture, or composition of matter, if you fit into one of those categories, then you're good. If you're in software, in a utility patent, we would claim that as a process. So like the set of steps that the software functionally performs. But there are now excluded areas, and where they've had the most impact is in software, in business methods, and with certain life science areas. So if you have, the key things to know are a new and useful gene can't be patented. So, and products of nature. So if you have a biomarker, for example, that you've discovered, and that's the only new thing, a diagnostic kit is going to need some other novel thing incorporated into it besides just the biomarker that identifies whatever the information of value is. And then with software, if the algorithm itself, because algorithms are not patentable by themselves, if the algorithm itself is the only new thing about your invention, you're going to have a challenge. But in your space in MEMS, with all these novel materials and things like that, it's a really ripe area for patenting, whether it's kind of as an article of manufacture or composition of matter. So you might have software components too, but many times copyright is sufficient for the software part. And frankly, trying to keep up patent protection for all of the ongoing changes with your software might not be worth it. And those process patents can be difficult to enforce. Like if you need, 20 steps in your claim to be able to get that claim issued, then think about how somebody can get around that, because to enforce against somebody for infringement, you're gonna have to stop they're gonna need to be performing each and every element of your claim. And big corporate legal departments and teams of engineers are going to be doing design around sessions to think, sometimes this process is called patent breaking, or designing around looking at your claim set that's issued, and can I eliminate one of those? What can I do differently? So again, while you could patent software, oftentimes not worth it. And oftentimes Fortune 50 companies are not filing on that except for more and exceptional circumstances. So again, with patents, the key here is you're getting this, it's kind of a bargain with the government to publicly disclose to advance science and technology. Now in academia, again, you're probably going to do this anyway, but in industry to be motivated to make that kind of contribution, in exchange for that, you're receiving a 20-year monopoly where you can stop others from making, using, and selling your invention. Key thing to know is patentable does not necessarily mean valuable. I mean, the key thing is that your invention is new, but if your invention doesn't solve an important problem for society and it doesn't do it in a commercially relevant way, then you might just have what we sometimes call a vanity patent, which is great for your CV or to hang on a wall or whatever, but might not have any value beyond what you paid the patent attorney for it, which could be quite a bit of money, right? So you want to have a process for kind of managing this. And so what usually we do in deep technology industries, in life science industry, and in academia is to first start with a provisional patent application. These are not examined, but they get you a priority date so that you're not creating that prior art against yourself, you're not barring yourself. And since those are low cost and they last for 1 year, you can use that year or 12, 10 months to really vet, is it worth investing more? At the same time, and this is why it aligns with those parallel processes of business de-risking and technical de-risking. So you have one opportunity to add new material to the same patent application, and that's at what we call conversion from that 12-month mark onto a non-provisional application. So at that time, you could file either directly into the United States or use a PCT or international application. PCT or international application is going to hold open the opportunity in a lot more countries. So that's going to be our usual pathway, because you might want all those markets, and it just kind of buys you time to make that decision a little bit later. So so during that initial 12 months, you might find, okay, the business need dictates that we make a small change to the technology, or as you're continuing to develop the technology, you might find some additional solution to a technical problem. You can get that into the non-provisional application, and it's going to save you cost. But once you're past that time period, you're looking at filing a new application with a new priority date, and your own publications are going to start to come into play in terms of limiting the protection that you can get or stopping you from getting. All right, so just really quickly on provisionals, I'm not going to read everything that's on the slide, but another advantage to them is they push forward the patent monopoly. So your 20-year patent term starts at the time that you file a non-provisional application. So if you're not going to get to the market right away and you don't expect a competitor to, then pushing out your monopoly further, getting 21 years forward instead of 20 is probably the way to go. Because if it's going to take, NSF data tells us that from invention to a license is often 4 or 5 years, and it might even take more time than that to get to the market. Well, and if your competitor is going to be in a similar situation, then that early days of being able to enforce are not that important. If you find that it will be important, you can take a different strategy and you can spend more money up front. And there's an accelerated process in the US where they'll try to work with you to get something to grant within 1 year. But usually with deep technologies that are based on academic research, you want more time. And then if you have a drug or a therapeutic or a medical device, the likelihood is that it's going to be most valuable at the end of the patent term. So having an extra year further out is good. So some people think, oh, it's not a full patent and like this is just a cheap way out. No, it's also something that like Fortune 500 life science companies are doing with their therapeutics to push that time forward, because they want as long of patent monopoly as possible. So just really quickly, these are the contracting states of the Patent Cooperation Treaty. I think one of the big territories that's not a signatory to be aware of is Argentina, but for the most part, you're going to be able to use this process to go into any industrialized country that you would care about getting protection into. And this is just one more way of kind of visualizing that process. So strategically, holding out that opportunity to file in lots of countries, using the provisional patent application first. For us at about the 10-month mark, or as an entrepreneur, you're probably thinking, okay, do I have enough evidence that this is worth continuing on? So is there funding to keep doing whatever development that I need to do? Have I found kind of a business use for this? And even if it doesn't mean there's immediate revenue, then those signals might say, okay, well, let's go ahead and convert. And then, hopefully we can find a partner or find some investment or whatever before we get to what's called that national phase deadline, where you have to decide which countries you're going to go into, and you could spend tens of thousands in all of them. And as an example, for a pharmaceutical patent, you could spend $10,000 or $15,000 just on Japanese translation, in addition to the cost of the patent application. So you could spend hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars here, which I don't advise that you do unless you have some commercial evidence that that's going to be worthwhile, and hopefully you have investors. So key thing to know about patent law that's different from copyright law. In copyright law, the legal default, if you have no employment agreement or your employment agreement is silent on this, is that there's something called the work made for hire doctrine, where if you make something in the scope of your employment for the employer, then the employer would own it by default. This is not the case with patents, but your employment agreement, like if you work at a tech company, probably has an assignment of rights. But if you're going to be a start, meaning it transfers ownership from you to the company, for things that you develop in the scope of your employment. But a key thing in academia is we are required by the terms of our grants and by federal regulations to take an assignment of that invention. But again, if we license that, first of all, we're paying the patent costs at the university. And then if we do successfully license to industry, then we would share the cost with you. Another thing to know about is in addition to patentability, can I get a patent on my invention, is freedom to operate. So an improvement on an existing invention can be patentable. You can add one layer of new things to an existing invention and get a patent on that. But if somebody else has a patent on that underlying thing that you're improving, and that patent's still active, it's still within that 20-year term, they could stop you from entering the market. So you might have to think about, how do I design around them, or how do I partner with them? So freedom, so those are the two key things. Is patentability, can I get a patent? Is my thing new, useful, non-obvious, etc.? And does somebody else have issued patent claims that would stop me? And you can really get into the weeds on this, but this is where, like, if you're doing your own search, you would search more the claims in abstract instead of the whole body of patent. I would say, if you're going to do your own search, avoid tools that don't protect your search contents. Google Patents, for example, if does not. You are giving the things that you type into that search bar, you're letting them run, train algorithms on it, and so forth. I like to use lens.org. I haven't looked at the terms lately, but the last time that I looked, your inputs are protected. Similarly with AI tools, two things that I would caution about AI tools. One is, like, if you're using a public version and not the commercial data rights version that hopefully through your institution you have access to an institutional account that you can log into, then you're a little more safe. But the other thing is, most of them don't seem to be trained on the full bodies of patents. At most, they're trained on abstracts. So there are specialized AI tools for patent searching that cost a lot more, that you could use for art searching and freedom to operate analysis. But you probably can't rely on AI tools to really be thorough for that. And then again, if you're putting things in, and then AI in the scope of invention or creation is also, of course, becoming a big topic, because we're using AI now to help assist innovation, right? Help us think, in the case of a drug or a material, like, what is a different structure that might work? So the key thing is, only humans can be named inventors on patents, and but there can be a mixture, right? And so only the human invented elements can be protected. So there must, and then I think, are going to start to see these types of things play out in court more. This is not a legal doctrine that is super settled, other than that core concept of, invention and creation, in the case of a copyright too, can only be human. But you can kind of mold these things together. And it will be interesting to see over time, as patents get challenged, where does that stop and start with respect to what was created by AI and created by humans in that process. So developing area, but something to pay attention to. So initial and continuing triage. So we kind of talked about this a bit, but again, at those different steps that we kind of illustrated in time, and as you go into national phase and your patent actually gets examined, as an entrepreneur or in tech transfer, you're just continuing to think, is this worth continuing to spend money on, because patents are expensive? So we're thinking about, again, have we found that important commercial problem? And if not, it might be time to walk away, or in our case, waive the invention. So yeah, in universities, that publisher perish mentality is a key strain on tech transfer. In industry, you might wait to file a patent application until just before you're going to release a product, or have a press release about a product, something like that, if you don't think that it's such a fast-moving art area that somebody might be right on your heels technically, in which case, you would file a little earlier. But here, usually it's, okay, researcher lets us know they're going to publish in a journal, and we accommodate that. But we are often filing rushed provisional patent applications to get ahead of those publication timelines. So if you're working with the University Tech Transfer Office, if you're submitting a journal article and you think you might have something valuable, at least let them know at that time. I mean, a month or two, I would say, is the minimum if you really want to get their attention and get a quality patent application. We have filed them on the same day. Like, I was once alerted by one of Professor Kassen's colleagues that there was going to be a thesis dissertation that was going to disclose an invention on the afternoon of the same day. And we filed to get ahead of that. And it was a publicly open dissertation, so we needed to do it. But you can imagine what the quality of that patent application would be in terms of if we one day need to enforce compared to what you could get if you just give a little bit of time. And I think we're also operating on a lot less evidence oftentimes, unless we have maybe a researcher who has been through working in industry or has experience with startups before. They might not have thought through what's the way to apply this commercially. So we're filing with a lot of assumptions and then using that 1-year pendency of the provisional to really hammer out what to do. Now, the cost. So I would say for getting a US utility patent to issue anywhere, $15,000 is going to be really cheap. If you're able to do that, you're doing excellent. I would say more commonly it's probably closer to 50,000, and that's for all of the process. So that provisional, non-provisional, responding to office actions, and then you have maintenance fees at 3.5, 7, and 11 years to keep the patent alive after that. And in most territories outside the United States, you pay annuity fees instead while the patent is pending, and then each year to keep it alive. So again, you have this ongoing burning cost, and you want to be thinking about, how do I stop it? So how do I do this de-risking? So if you have connections to NSF research, or if you have this program at your campus and you want to learn more, I would really consider doing it. So that's the NSF I-Core program. It's built on lean startup principles or evidence-based entrepreneurship, or another term is customer discovery. But going out there to ask those questions, to understand what's the commercial problem that I'm solving, and is there a problem solution fit or a product market fit, and really synthesizing what you learn to build what we call a value proposition that's going to align with your technology. And this is the way that they're doing tech commercialization everywhere, and it's the way that they're doing it in big companies. And if you just want to learn more, the Lean Startup by Eric Ries is a great resource to read. The Startup Owner's Manual is another good book that kind of goes through a lot of these. And then using this process, you can kind of figure out, maybe do I want to start a company, or do I really have something here, or what do I need to change in order to have something that might be valuable? And then also, what are the prospects of being able to license to industry? And even just going through the process helps you build that kind of network with industry, because you're going to talk to potential customers, potential partners, potential sources of funding, domain experts if you need them, like in regulatory. You're going to come away with a lot of knowledge. And it might not be that first invention that's going to be the one that hits, but that tool can be used. It's a repeatable process for the future. So just to kind of show you an example of a patent, so we've got one of Sam Kassen's up here, you can see kind of this is a MEMS invention relevant to you folks. Layers of a couple different materials that have gone into materials that are relevant to his startup. And then, really quickly on licensing. So licenses are a grant of permission. So if the university, for example, owns these exclusionary rights, we can stop others from making, using, selling. We're going to grant that permission to make, use, and sell to a company, which could be your startup, or could be direct to an end user even. An exclusive license is going to be the most common tool for a startup. If you're a startup, you want as many rights as possible. If you recall, the initial thing that I said out of the gate was think about an investor considering you for an investment prospect. How do you stop others? You want that whole bundle of rights to be able to stop everybody, versus a non-exclusive license just means you have permission. So if, for a certain enabling technology, it might be strategically better for the university to just license this thing to a lot of different companies. But if it's something that requires a lot of fundraising, then giving it to one entity that can raise a lot of capital is probably a better way forward. And then you can also chop things up by territories. If you take an exclusive license as the startup, you can also grant usually what are called sub-licenses. So if you find a company to partner with in Asia and you don't feel like you can meet that market, you can grant a territorial exclusive to them in that territory, in China, Japan, whatever. Or sometimes you can do it by kind of technical domains or market areas. So a market segment, one that's common is to have exclusive rights for human health and then grant a different license to a different company for animal health. Like Elanco, an animal health company, might take a license for you for that market if you don't feel like you can address it. And Sam is on the line, and his company Graphiton is in this camp of taking a faculty startup license. Won't go too into the weeds here, but a key thing is universities generally incentivize startups and give them preferable terms that defer anything that they would have to pay out of pocket. So you're going to have a running royalty at some point generally, but instead of an upfront license issue fee, we might take a small proportion of equity. And then generally we would defer. So exclusive licensees, companies that take exclusive licenses generally are accountable for paying for the patent costs, but we are going to defer that so that you have opportunity to generate revenue or raise capital, and so that you're hopefully not reaching into your own pocket to pay us. That's not the objective. The objective is to have impact from your research. And now, if it's a Fortune 50 company, yeah, we're going to insist on an upfront fee, and things are going to be structured a little bit differently. One more thing there that's important, sorry, is the diligence obligation. So if you're licensing to only one party, all of your eggs are in that basket. So you want them to have a requirement to diligently pursue commercialization, and generally you might also have some specific milestones in that regard, so that if that's not happening, if a company decides to shelf your technology and they really just took a license because they wanted to take you out of the competition, you want to get out of that situation because you're not going to earn any running royalties. And so you want to have what's called a diligence provision to be able to claw that back. So we've talked about these non-dilutive sources, and just these are kind of some resources to know about. CooleyGo is one that I mentioned. Patent Center is a place through the US Patent and Trademark Office where you can kind of monitor the progress. Google Patents, I did mention, it's a good tool, but be careful because of what you're putting in there. And lens.org has a nice structured search function that similarly has patents from all over the world. So I recommend that one instead. If you're using Google Scholar, you can just click a button to add patents. So if you're thinking about, is my thing novel, you can add that to your literature search. It's going to give you more results to think about. And then these University of Michigan videos are good. They're kind of dry, but if you have more desire for learning about intellectual property, these were developed for their NSF I-Corps program, and they have them on 50 plus kind of subtopics within intellectual property, and they're quite excellent. So kind of stop there, and if there's any questions, let me know.
Excellent talk. Thank you very much, Tommy. It's full of information. This was very rich. So any question from our audience?
Hey, Tommy, I have a question.
Mhm.
Very good, great presentation. Can we go back to so I'm referring back to the, the slides where you have the map basically laid out, about the PCTs, as well as on the left side, basically explaining the, customer discovery process, as well as business development and de-risking. So basically, for a small startup, we try to talk with customers, at the get-go to find our, beachhead. So a lot of those comes in the form, in my industry, so in the forms of questionnaires, like physicians' questionnaires. So you start to engage them, talk about ideas, and talk about their needs. Then once our technology or product start to gain traction, so very often, earlier a surveyor, like our customers would like to get engaged with our company. Are there any guidance on what is considered a voice of customer or like a user needs versus a patent, as we're moving moving the technology forward?
Yeah, so certainly you can be inspired to invent based on solving their pain. And another thing that I'd say is survey instruments, like sending those out, those can be helpful, but the kind of current teachings really do push you to have those conversations. A lot of times there's these things that are hidden outside of your survey questions where you're kind of having that free-flowing conversation and the responses are more open-ended. We do see a lot of really golden nuggets get uncovered that way. But yeah, so let's say, you learn that they have a particular pain point, and now you're going to invent technical features that solve that pain point. And they might be really modest changes even to something that you already have. But if you can get those in, when you have the pending provisional patent application, you can add those as new matter, or otherwise you can file a new patent application. And again, like we really do kind of teach that you're doing learning interviews, you're not pitching your product. So you'd say almost nothing about your product in those early stages of what we call customer discovery. And so you really shouldn't have to reveal anything that's proprietary to you. I think that's something that's kind of important about that process at the early stage. Now, once you have like customer traction, you have real paying customers, it becomes a different relationship. And you can have, like depending on what the type of product is, you can, have aspects that are proprietary and have that kind of clear cut in your contracting process.
So are there any references or guidance we can read or study about this so we can set some internal SOPs, when we engage with potential customers or even investors?
So I would say there's some good stuff in those intellectual property videos from the University of Michigan that I referenced. And then two other sources. There's a guide that's free to download called Talking to Humans that's part of the NSF I-Core curriculum sometimes. I don't know if they're currently using it or not, but it really like goes into nuts and bolts of this kind of communication process. And of course, Lean Startup really kind of teaches the underlying principles, because there's kind of the legal component, and then there's really the semantics of how those conversations go. Talking to Humans and kind of the Lean Startup tells you more about how to do that.
Okay, so I'm gonna follow still like with one more question, maybe two, on the same slide. So you talked about PCT, and it was great to learn about, we can do a provisional plus PCT to gain 30 months prior to the non-provisional filing. This is great. So can you verify that there's also a rule that, for example, when we work in academia, we do a competition on public presentation. And since the day of public presentation, we also have about a year, is that right, of follow-up period to file patent?
So in the United States, your own publication, you have a 1-year buffer period from. In most territories around the world, you're deemed to have given that invention away. Now, you also have to consider, though, what did you give away, right? You might still have more technical detail than what was in there. So something that happens to us, I mean, this happens to us all the time. Unfortunately, as much education that we try to push out there to faculty, this just happens, even to people who know better. And then, some of them land within that 1-year buffer. That saves them within the United States. And it might be the case that they just get narrower protection in some of the other countries. So that publication, or abstract or whatever it is, if there's more technical detail beyond that, then you might still be able to get some protection. It's just not going to be as broad. But most territories do not have that 1-year buffer. I can think of a few others that have a buffer, but you can't always access it through the PCT process, number one, and it's not always 1 year. Like I think Korea may have a buffer and Japan may have a buffer, but it might only be 6 months, and you might have to file directly in that country to be able to rely on it. So the bottom line is that you want to be ahead of that publication if you can, but you can also be, I'd say work with counsel, work with your tech transfer office on talking about what you're doing without all of the technical detail about how you do it. But I do understand that in academia, and like if you're going to an IEEE or something, it can be hard to not get, feel the desire to go pretty deep into that technology. So that's why, I mean, oftentimes we'll just file,
Can we use an example? For example, in the United States, we have 12-month buffer, and in Japan, we have 6-month buffer. So in January, I did a presentation that there are patentable, items in there that I want to follow through. How do I, in that case, would I use the provisional plus PCT, library?
Yeah, so make sure that you file within the 1-year anniversary of whatever that public disclosure date is. And then so that should help you in the US market. In Japan, I'm actually not sure whether or not you can take advantage of whatever buffer that they have through the PCT process. We usually don't even try, to be honest, but I do know that in certain countries, and Japan might be one of them, where in order to take advantage of that, instead of the PCT process, you'd have to file an application directly in Japan contemporaneously. That might be the case. So we do, the other thing that you do is you coordinate with local counsel once you're going in to file national phase applications, because there are even with the amount of harmonization that we've done through these treaties, there are nuances of local laws, and it's hard to know everything.
So one last follow-up. So basically, if I disclose something in the United States publicly, and nowadays information is flying around everywhere in the world, does that count disclosure in the state or in Japan, for example, in this case?
Yeah, so prior art will be a public disclosure that's reasonably accessible to the public in any language, anywhere. It doesn't matter where it is or in what language. The key thing is it reasonably accessible to the public? And in US patent law, that's been held to mean even, a single reference that's available in one library in Germany in German language, that can be obtained and it's reasonably accessible to the public.
Got it. Thank you. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you very much for the great presentation, and we are running over the time. So in the interest of the time, maybe we can move to the next speaker.
All right.
So our next speaker is Dr. Monsur Islam. He's a leading junior researcher at the IMDEA Materials Institute, Madrid, Spain. Dr. Islam's work focuses on development of advanced materials and nanostructures with particular emphasis on MEMS and their applications in energy storage, sensors, and nanoelectronics. At IMDEA, Dr. Islam contributes to interdisciplinary research that bridges material science, physics, and engineering, leveraging cutting-edge techniques in characterization and fabrication to drive innovation in next-generation functional materials. He is actively involved in international collaboration and is recognized for his expertise in both experimental and theoretical aspects of nanomaterial design. He will share his experience with for the early career researchers. So please join me welcoming Dr. Monsur Islam.
Thank you,
Islam,
Nais.
the floor is yours.
Yeah, let me share my screen. You can see the slide, right?
Yes, we can.
Okay,
Yes.
perfect.
Thank you.
Thanks again. And first, I'd like to thank Peggy and Sam for inviting me for this workshop and particularly considering me to speak for early career guidance. I don't know if I am still qualified for that, but I will try my best. So again, yeah, I'm Dr. Monsur Islam. I'm currently working in IMDEA Material Institute, which is in Madrid, in Spain. So I will basically what I will do for this presentation is that I will briefly talk about first my research journey, and then what I am working on at different part of my journey, and then what I learned from it. And maybe that might be useful for many of my fellow PhD or postdoc researchers. So first, this is basically what I have done so far in my career. Sorry. So I don't know what's happening. Okay, cool. So I did my PhD from Clemson University. I graduated in 2018, and my supervisor was Rodrigo, also part of this Carbon MEMS community. And after that, after finishing my PhD, I moved to Germany. One of the reason was actually to explore more international experience, international cultural experience and all. And KIT is a great place to be in. And I worked there initially started as a postdoc in Professor Jan Corving's group, and then slowly climbed up the ladder of becoming a PI after I get my first grant, DFG grant, in 2022. But at the same time, I also got another fellowship from the European Commission, which is a Marie Curie fellowship. And because of that, I moved to IMDEA, currently where I am right now. And this fellowship is going to end next month. And in between, I acquired another fellowship, which led me to get the position of assistant professorship in Polytechnic University of Madrid, which is also very close by where I am now. So in this period, the main work that I have done, the focus has been always priority carbon, or we also call it classic carbon at a certain stage. And I guess most of the audience here know about this carbon material. It's an allotrope of other carbon, and we generally achieve them through pyrolysis of a polymer. So I'm not going to detail. So during my PhD, focusing on this material, as we all started with carbon MEMS, we started with this photolithography based process where we make these small 2D and 2.5D structures. I also investigate this same material during my PhD. And then we use them for particularly healthcare diagnostics using carbon dielectrophoresis. Carbon electrodielectrophoresis for several applications, starting from cell enrichment, like characterizations of different pathogens. Also in collaboration with Meltes in Turkey, they are using our devices for different biological or blood analysis, basically. Apart from this carbon-based microelectrodes, I also worked on a new technique called origami-inspired manufacturing, where basically we take a flat piece of paper, fold them into origami structures, and paralyze them. So when you take the paper, when you just paralyze them, you get carbon. But if you functionalize the paper with different kinds of metals, depending on the process you are doing during the heat treatment, either you can get a metal carbon composite, metal oxide carbon composite, or if you go to a high temperature, you can get carbide structures, basically. So we have investigated both carbon origami and carbide origami and characterize their mechanical, electrical properties. And particularly this kind of origami has shown that depending on the heat treatment process, depending on the geometry of the origami structures, we can tune their properties. And these properties are quite beneficial compared to other kind of lightweight materials, which, let me find the laser pointer, which you can see on this graph, where we compared them with different other low density materials. So basically these two were my premise for my PhD. I'm not going into details, just giving you a brief overview of them. So once I moved to KIT, I basically explored different other routes for carbon micro nano manufacturing. One of them was predominantly was this 3D printing, where you can do UV laser 3D printing to make complicated 3D structures of a resin, and then you paralyze them, you can get complex 3D structures of carbon. And we investigated different structures, both 3D and sort of 4D carbon structures that you can see on the top, which is like caterpillar, you can move them. Also, another printing technology, which is near field electrospinning. So I guess many of you know that electrospinning is mostly used for making nanofibers, but instead of having it as just as nanofiber deposition technique, we put them layer by layer and try to get them 3D structures, and then laser induced graphene. So basically in the laser induced graphene, you take a flat sheet of any kind of sheet actually, and with a laser beam, you just write on them with a optimized parameter. So what happens, the laser does not cut through the material, rather the laser carbonizes the material. So you can, instead of cutting the material, you are selectively converting that polymer into carbon. So we extensively characterize this laser induced graphene for different parameters and use them, also functionalize them in different ways, from electroplating, electrodeposition, with spray coating, and depending on which material we are getting at the end, we use them for different applications. For example, this electroplated partially oxidized copper laser graphene, we use them for biosensors. Also combining with P.PSS, we use them for skin electrode, and also when we combine them with other carbon form, is a very good materials for high surface area electrodes. So we use them for supercapacitors. As I said, in electrospinning, instead of having randomly oriented fibers, we investigated how we can deposit the fiber at the same location. We investigated different parameters to stack the fibers to get this kind of 3D structures. So the one that you see here is basically polymer structures, but we have been working there also how we can convert them or choosing the right polymer for electrospinning that can be further convertible to for carbon. So we used cellulose acetate, and having this cellulose acetate wall, we can then convert them into cellulose and then from cellulose to carbon. Coming to the 3D printing, again, as I said before, we basically use this stereolithography or DLP printing based process to get the resin 3D structures, and after the pyrolysis, we return the structures as we have seen many times in carbon MEMS technology. And with that, we can, depending on the 3D printed process, either you can use DLP process or you can use 2-photon polymerization, you achieve higher resolution. And after pyrolysis, as it shrinks a lot, you can achieve even more resolution in terms of the carbon architectures. And these carbon materials, initially we have investigated for checking their biocompatibility. We have checked both pre-osteoblast cells, muscle cells, and also we use this carbon as a template for growing other materials. For example, here you can see we have like up in the post-processing of the carbon, we grew metal oxide nanowires, and this metal oxide nanowire carbon 3D composite structures, we use them for photocatalysis. At the end, what happens if you have a contaminated water, you just leave these structures in that contaminated water, leave them in sun for extensive amount of time, and it cleans the water due to photocatalysis. Also, as carbon is conductive, or we can make carbon conductive depending on the process, it's good for electroplating. So here we electroplated copper, we can electroplate nickel, and in this way we can make architected electrode for hydrogen production. So this is the premise for my research during KIT in Karlsruhe. So after that, as I said, I got the Marie Curie Fellowship to move to IMDEA, where I chose this cell interaction path and try to extensively understand this. So instead of using commercial resins, we are preparing our own resins, in the sense that we can customize the resins in a way. So we use polyethylene glycol diacrylate as the precursor and convert them to carbon. And during this process, as it shrinks a lot, we can achieve porous structures, which is very similar to the native bone. And in that way, we basically put the cells, the pre-osteoblast cells, and checked how cells grow on them, how cells mature on them, means from pre-osteoblast to osteoblast. And we characterize these things, and we recently these studies and published in small structures. So if you want to study, you can read that paper for bit detailed understanding. Also, in this process, we have been checking also how we can functionalize this carbon also. So we have been growing metal organic framework inside this precursor, and then converting them to carbon, and then checking the cell activity on them. I haven't presented the results, just to have the glimpse of it. So this is what I did research so far. And my research in my tenure in UPM, or the Polytechnic University of Madrid, hasn't started yet. I am joining there for September, but the main research that I will do is kind of continuation of this work to understand how we can make 3D carbon, how we can functionalize 3D carbon, and how we can understand the interaction between different cell types and this carbon to solve biomedical problem. So that's the premise. So in this journey, it has been since my PhD, it has been now 7 years. I will share where I face different challenges, and probably the new researchers, the master student, PhDs and postdoc might be helpful from there. So one of the things that was difficult for me was to finding the research identity. Like, of course, I knew that I like carbon material, so I want to do something on that, but carbon is not a new material, right? So it has been there since long time. There have been evidence of having nanotubes on the weapons of cave human. So you can imagine since that time. But like what we can do better, and it has been kind of like a trial and test method. In my period, of course, in my PhD I did carbon electrode origami, but I wanted to build my own identity since my postdoc in KIT. I have tried, like I said, like laser induced graphene, normal carbon MEMS based, 3D printing based. And what I understood that I really like fabrication of these carbon materials, but just fabrication might not be enough for my future career, and or I felt it was not enough, and I wanted to do something with that. And that's why I explored different avenue. I explored energy device, I explored biosensors, I explored other even gas sensors. So I tried different things, but what I really liked is the connection of this 3D printing, material synthesis, and these bio interfaces. And that's the motivation for me to apply for the Marie Curie fellowship. That okay, I want to really integrate these three into my research, and I want to build that my identity. And that's what I have been doing right now to so defining my identity. I don't know how this research path will take me in the future, but currently that is my research identity. I want to carry forward that. So as I said, like it's not just the topic I am working on. Like it's not like, okay, I have these amazing materials and I want to use them for, and this conductive high surface area, I want to use it for supercapacitor. But is not the pattern of work that I am doing. It's what I feel comfortable and what's the need in the scientific field. These two should come together to define your identity. That's what my feeling is, and it took time for me to really find that. So the second thing that was, and it sounds very generic, is the publication, because many of us, and particularly for me, initially was like, okay, I published something and I feel really good. But the more I published, I understood that the numbers doesn't matter actually. So in my PhD, I had like, I don't know, remember like 12 or 13 paper, and I was very proud of that, to be frank. In my postdoc also, I published a lot of paper. And no doubt, like all the paper has their own merit, own journey, own time, own effort. And all the collaborators who put in that paper, kudos to them. But it happened that when I start writing my proposals, for example, this even for the Marie Curie, there is a section where I had to describe my CV, and I had to write down, okay, put down your 10 most relevant publication, and what's the impact, and what's the significance, and what's your role in that. And that led me think actually, like the publications that I made, were they really worth it? Do they have any significance? And that has nothing to do with where I publish the work. It can be a very high impact journal, it can be a very low impact journal. It can have a lot of citations, it can have very low citations. But as a researcher, it made me really think, like, are they really, the work that I have done, are they really worth it? Are they really have long-term impact? Is it not a just another paper on the field of energy devices or on the field of tissue engineering? What the new and novelty factor am I bringing on this topic? And that's why the journal names, impact factor, they're very nice. They're very nice to put on the CV on a Google Scholar page, and you can be proud that, okay, I have published something on, I don't know, 15, 20 impact factor. And sometimes the journal name and impact factor is associated with the scientific impact, but it's not always the case. And that's what I felt. And this is what also the proposal reviewers value, the scientific impact, not just the name and the number. So yeah, as the previous speaker said once, publish or perish, we need to keep publishing, and we need to have consistent publishing, sometimes the reviewers of the proposal or the grants or some fellowship, they really see that, okay, if you have publishing consistently, so we need to have that metrics or the wheel going on, but on the same time, we need to be like your scientific impact should be also there. So it can take time, the actual work that has real significance or real impact. But what I am trying to do now, or I will also recommend to my fellow researchers, my junior researchers, that take a moment and think what you are doing is really relevant enough or really have a good scientific value to it, just not for a publications. So it's very important. It might sound generic, but I promise you this is really, really, really important. And also when you publish, as I said, like publish really strategically, make full use of the resources you have, but they should not be just for the sake of, okay, I have this one, let's just do it. It should have also a good value to your work. So yeah, before preparing a publishing, just think, give more time to the thinking process, I would suggest, because writing a paper, just a normal paper or a very good paper, in terms of just writing, probably they take the same effort and time to write that, or little more probably. But the actual work that you are doing, that will speak for itself in later time, for sure. Then next is collaboration. One thing you must need to understand, that you cannot do everything by yourself. You don't have all the facilities to you. And that's why also the scientific significance matters, because that's let you to think like what else I can do that can make my work really significant. And that's where you need to ask for collaboration. Collaboration should not be like, okay, I have this sample, can you do a certain characterization? Like that case sort of collaboration, but think probably it might be better to think more than that. Like how the facilities or the expertise the other researcher has, how I can complement that. And that's very important. And that has been a cornerstone for me in my scientific journey. And particularly for that, and it gives a lot of publication, but I give you these two examples here. So in this one, what we did, we make compliant designs of carbon scaffold. And it requires a lot of design and simulation and fabrication effort. And this work took almost 2.5 years. And as I said, like this work was not published in, let's say, Advanced Materials or Nature Materials. It published in Advanced Healthcare Materials. But I am very proud of this paper because it is a collaboration between KIT, IMDEA Materials, where I'm right now, UPM, where I am going next, Heidelberg University, and each of the university like give their best effort to it. For example, I took care of all the fabrication and design. UPM took care of the simulation. IMDEA Materials, they have state-of-the-art in situ characterization facilities, so they took care of the in situ characterization. And in Heidelberg, they took care of the cell culture part of it, basically. And we brought together all of our effort to make this paper. The same way, this one is once I moved from KIT and I was in IMDEA. And in KIT, we really have a very good state-of-the-art and probably one of the best lab facility for micro MRI and NMR. So what we figured out that carbon is a material, if you process it correctly, it will be totally transparent to NMR signals, right? So if you culture cell on carbon scaffold, and you put it in the micro MRI system, you will only see the cells. You don't see the carbon at all. So we did the cell fabrication and the cell culture. KIT did all the micro MRI characterization and their micro MRI testing and their characterization. And UPM stepped in, or the Political and Technical University of Madrid, to do simulation using cellular automata. What it does that both I took care of the carbon, so it's an ideal material for micro MRI. Micro MRI, we scan the whole scaffold with cells, so we see the spatial location of the cells. And now we did experiment of like 3 days, 1 day, 3 days, 7 day in this time sequence. And with the cellular automata, UPM, they feed a machine learning model this data and try to characterize how cell grow in a 3D system. So, all those three complementary work come together to produce this paper. So I'm also very proud of this paper. Another thing in terms of collaboration, that when you want to write proposals, probably you don't have you might have a bigger idea, but you might not have all the expertise in your institute or in your facility. Similar thing happened. There was a call in 2021, I believe, from European Innovation Council on engineered living materials. And me and another professor in UPM, we had this idea to build carbon-based engineered living material, what we call living carbon. And we wanted to do try to build the system and explain them or use this system for both energy applications and healthcare. So we didn't have all the facilities or expertise in our field. So we started approaching different people, different experts from different universities all over Europe. We probably sent out almost 30 emails, and not all the emails are answered. So probably we didn't get that many answers from all the emails. But at the end, we got actually 5 more answers where they agreed to join this consortium, and we had 7 partners at the end. And we wrote this proposal. At the end, it didn't get funded. But what happened that during the writing process, we made a good partnership with all those collaborators. And not only we publish later together, but it also gives you, it's also a learning process, because you learn from the other expertise. When you have this idea, you are explaining the idea to the others, but they can also come up with their own idea, own knowledge, and own expertise, and that enriches your whole consortium idea. And this, I give the example of this one because in this one, we also wanted to see the ethical aspects of engineered materials, and that's why we collaborated with a professor expert on ethics in Aarhus University in Denmark. And later we wrote a paper which was the ethics of engineered living materials. This paper is actually one of the most cited paper in the last 5 years on that topic. So I am really proud of this consortium, even though it didn't get the funding. It got good points though. After the collaboration, you need to also build your visibility as a young researchers. Of course, the common thing is go to a conference or workshop, talk to different people, you build your network. That's very usual. But also you need to think also beyond that, just not go to a conference and talk to different people, but also try to organize one or try to be the part of the organizing team where I think you will make better connection with the people. I was part of the organizing committee in the MEMS meeting when I was in KIT. It was an online conference, but it really gave us a big visibility, not only in the MEMS community for me, but also in KIT. KIT is a very big university. It has a lot of institutes, right? And as a guest speaker, I was contacting the experts from different topic that related to MEMS within KIT. So that gave me visibility to those people. And later, so they also asked me to give a kind of workshop in one of the seminar of a research cluster called 3D matter made to order. So I also gave a seminar on carbon MEMS in there. So, it's a chain process. Once you gain these things, some other people might invite you, you will talk to other people. So it also gives you the visibility. And recently, one thing that really worked for me is that with with 3 other partners from Spain and Italy and in the United States. We organized a symposium on smart and living materials in the last MRS fall meeting. And we gathered almost, I don't remember the exact numbers, but 72 speakers, including the invited ones, in our symposium. So it was a great success actually, and we made collaborations. We had a great conversations during the conference. We had a great symposium dinner. So you build not only the reputation, but you also build these contacts, and they kind of get to know that okay, they kind of get to know on the human level, not just as a scientist, and that makes a difference, I must say. And also the collaboration makes a big role in here because through this collaboration you build your reputation, how punctual you are, how responsible you are, how efficient you are. That is kind of like on the investigation during this collaboration. The better you perform in this kind of collaborative work, I think the better output comes. And the reason I am saying this also because this name Andres Lantada, he's a full professor now in the Polytechnic University. I actually am going to them, sort of, he helped me a lot for that process because I had to get the fellowship, but after the fellowship I had to choose which university I am going. As he has been a very good partner for the last few years, I chose to go to this university as my next step. So that makes a big role in these kind of things as a for your decision making, for your visibility, for your reputation. And since the early stage, you have to start building your mentorship skill. When you are a PhD, you can mentor undergrad researchers. In my when I was in Clemson, Rodrigo had a huge army of undergrad researchers, and he was kind enough me to lead these undergrad researchers, and from them I learned a lot of things, and it was a really nice experience. And that led me to when I was in KIT, I actually had more than 10 master student because the experience that I gathered during my PhD, it helped me to grow and get that trust that okay, I can also get master student. And it and the benefit of this is sometimes you have a great idea or you have a new idea that you want to try out, right? But you don't have your time because you are probably involved in other meetings, other curriculums, other project, but you want to just try it out just to see. I think these undergrads or master thesis students are the great way of trying them. It not only helps you or nurture your creative mind or creative place, but it also helps you to also nurture them. They are also benefited because you want to try, right? And you don't know what's going to happen. So they also don't know. So they are also trying the same thing. And this process I really enjoyed that process. And it has a value because when you write proposals, particularly proposals for junior PI or senior level researchers, they see if you are able to lead a group or you are able to mentor junior researchers, and that really makes sense. For example, in my Marie Curie in my Ramanika Hall proposal for that I am going to the university, is that there is a particular section on the leadership and mentorship, and they have a particular select or score category in that section. And as I have all those things, probably I score better in that category. So I would say it's a very important thing that sometimes as a junior researchers, we sometimes overlook it, but you need to remember that if you want to succeed in academia, probably that's the one most one of the responsibility that you must have. So build it early, basically. And the most important thing is that you need to have funding to carry out your research. That's the most important thing. But writing a research grant is not a easy task, I must say. It's the failure rate is quite high. In the 5 years I stayed in Germany, I wrote, I think, seven or I think eight proposals, and I only got two. And I'm not talking about the big proposal. I am just talking about junior PI level proposals. So doesn't matter whether it's just a fellowship or a travel grant or just a scholarship or something, just write them. Like it helps you to prepare. It helps you to build the writing skill, how to write, what to focus on, these kind of things, and this is very necessary. And you need to be keep updated, check always when is the calls, when is the deadlines, and these things are very subjective to different places, depending on the country, depending on which content you are. It's very different in Europe than in US. I am giving some examples here from Europe. Basically, for example, at the postdoctoral level we have the Marie Curie fellowship. In Spain we have this Juan de la Cierva, which is for fresh PhDs. There are other fellowships also that I am not listing here, of course, on different other countries. Germany has different, Belgium has different, they have different things. At the junior PI level, of course, the most famous one is the ERC starting grant. In Germany, we have this Emenoiter program, which is very similar to ERC starting grant. They give money for 5 years to start a lab, have a group. And equivalent to that is what I got now is the Ramon y Cajal in Spain. This is also national grant, so that helps you to be a junior PI. You can build your group, you can have your research lab, and then depending on which country you are, you will go through either this tenure track system or not, depending on that. For example, for my case, after 5 years they are supposed is very similar to the assistant professor tenure track position. So after 5 years they are supposed to give me an associate professorship positions if I perform well in these 5 years. And other than this postdoctoral or junior PI, there are also different collaborative proposals. There are lots of them. Two of the most significant ones are this ERC Synergy Grant, where you need to collaborate with at least like with four, like the team should be four PIs, and it's a European level. Same with this EIC, European Innovation Council. You don't have a limit of the partners. I know EIC Pathfinder consortium where they have like 14 or 15 partners. But again, all those ones depends on you have a great idea. You should have a great idea and you want to proceed with that. And remember one thing, your first idea might not be your last idea. So this idea develops over time. It needs time. Last year, I submitted this ERC starting grant. Uh, it took me 8 months to write that proposal. Like after 2 or 3 months, I sent this proposal to one of the senior researchers here, and he said that like it's good, but I don't understand the work package 3 to work package 5. So it's an indication that okay, the draft that I wrote is not comprehensible. So it's also important once you write the draft, you send this draft to your peers, your colleagues, so that they can read and they can understand, they can give their feedback. Because not necessarily the grant that you are writing in your field, the reviewers is from the same field. So reviewer might be from a different field and they are seeing that grant or seeing that draft proposal from a different point of view. So it sometimes is very useful that someone who is not from your field reads that grant and understand the benefit of it. So yeah, so start with plenty of time so that you have time to iterate, reiterate, reiterate until you have the final version 20 or something. But at the end, you need to, this is learning curve. So yeah, like you will get failures, you will get rejections and everything, but like try to learn from them, try to read the reviewer's comment if you have the comment available, and see where the drawbacks are and apply them in your next proposal. So that's why start early as possible. So and it will give you good credit at the end. So I think that's the most of the ideas or most of the challenges I have faced or I have learned. And at the end, I am bound to show this slide for my grant that I got for my Marie Curie grant from European Commission. And I like to thank all the people that helped me so far to reach this point. And I must say this Carbon MEMS community has a huge role in that. I am literally a product of this Carbon MEMS community. I started my career with like my research journey with Professor Amitabh Ghosh, who was and Mark Meadow. So these two are, I think, the starting since in the Indo-US Science and Technology Forum, where they started this Fabionics cluster and started doing carbon MEMS. And then I, of course, went to Mark's lab to my internship, went to Rodrigo. Rodrigo's lab, spent there 5 years, then also to Germany. So I am literally jumping from one carbon MEMS group to another one. And now I am starting my own carbon MEMS group in Madrid. Madrid didn't have a carbon MEMS group so far, so now you have a place here for carbon MEMS. And yeah, anytime any of you want to visit Madrid or anything, just let me know. I'll be very happy to host you. And it will be a really pleasure. So with that, I'll thank again to all of you for listening to me. I don't know if I did any sort of justice or give any valuable information about it, but I feel honored to give this talk. Thanks again.
Thank you, Dr. Islam. It was full of insights. A very, very good talk. Thank you.
Oh, thanks.
So let's look at our audience. I think we have I saw one. Oh yeah, Shubham, please go ahead.
Hi, Monsur. It was a wonderful presentation. I think you are from our same group, and it's the first time we are interacting.
Yeah.
So I have one quick question about when you started your own journey after your PhD with Dr. Rodrigo. I definitely know you had research experience back in India before joining Dr. Rodrigo, and you had the same experience. But how did you actually plan to part ways such that your own research journey is unique from what you did of what work you did with Dr. Rodrigo during your PhD? So how did you start your own journey? Was it the postdoc that gave you ideas, or how that happened? If you can just throw some light on that.
It is interesting. I won't say that yes, it was very easy because again, you need to have a idea, right? And when you are a fresh PhD, your most of the ideas, I think at least what happened to me was stuck to what you did before. So of course, when I went to Jan's lab in KIT, I had a project that I had to deliver on, but that was still Jan's project, not my project, and I want to build my own identity. So I was trying different things, but
Yeah.
at the end, I think what helped me that as I was trying different things, I realized that okay, this thing, which is for my case was 3D printing, was I like it a lot, and it has a demand, and it's is kind of growing, and no one is actually investigating this 3D printing that much. So there is a huge scope that I can grow on. On the same time, I was of course doing 3D printing for different applications, and I always liked biology since my PhD. So I wanted to apply it for biology. So these three, and I saw that, okay, there's a huge demand, or there is a area to grow in that. And that kind of pushed me through. So I don't know who it was not a moment, but it was a lot of trial and error, lots of reading, lots of reading, lots of discussions, lots of suggestions. Yeah, it was a lot. But at the end, you need to have your own liking and what science needs. They need to match. For some people, it was very easy or straightforward. For some people, not. For me, it was not so easy, but it looks bright now, I hope.
Your research journey definitely looks very bright. Honestly,
No,
it's a motivation for us. Thank you.
no, thanks.
Is there another question? Yeah, Carter. Please go ahead, Carter.
Yeah, hi. Thank you
Hi.
so much for the wonderful talk. I really just wanted to mainly ask a little bit about some of the challenges you faced and kind of how you overcame them, specifically like in the transition from your like PhD. It seems like you were quite internationally traveled. So speaking to that a little bit would also be nice to know as like someone that's trying to maybe break into the assistant professorship down the line.
Okay, so so again, it was like again very much trial and tested method that you need to try different things if you are not sure what you want to do or if you want to build your identity. So since the postdoc, I think you need to try different things, and in a way, like yeah, you need to, after you try it, and then you get the success. And also at the beginning, when you are trying, you also need to talk to your not a supervisor but other researchers, like, okay, I am trying these things, what do you think? I am writing, I find this call. For example, when I first write my proposal, it was the second year in my KIT, and I actually, there's a call for proposal, so I went to Jan and I said, okay, Jan, see, I want to write this proposal. What do you think? Is it good? Is it bad? Is it worth it? And Jan gave me his own comments. I talked to other people also on the similar field. They gave their own comment. And then you make your conclusion on what you actually want to write, or is it worth writing for you? Because sometimes the call is very different than what you actually do or what you want to do. So you need to make a balance. You need to talk to other peers who have been already in this journey, and then see how they have gone through, and take probably inspiration or take suggestions from them. Up to you at the end what you'll decide, and probably going against their suggestion might change your destiny, or going in taking their suggestion might change your future. So that really depends. And in terms of internationalization, like, my main motive was to um, understand different culture. That was my first motive. That's why I went from India to US and then US to Europe. That was one of my main motivation. But it also helped me a lot because at least I know in Europe, whenever you apply for assistant professorship or junior PI, you need to show that you are well internationally aware. So that, because now many students are applying to come, particularly from Asian countries. I know from India or Bangladesh, Pakistan, many people want to come outside to do their PhD, master, postdoc. And for that, you need to have very, like, of course, you need to have a very open mindset, but that also helps you to understand their background. For example, a student from India might not have the same like working mindset than a person from Spain or Germany. So that helps you to kind of comprehend their mindset and help them grow better. Of course, it's their duty also to understand that thing and help themselves grow better, but it's also a supervisor's or a mentor's responsibility, at least for me, to do the same, to help them. And if you are aware of or sort of kind of understand their mentality, it works very well. So I have mentored, like, of course, German, Spanish, students from China, India, Taiwan, Turkey. So, and I can say it here, I guess my wife is Mexican. So I think that helps a lot. So yeah, in terms of growing as an academician, I think it having defined international experience help you to grow and help you to be a better mentor, I would say.
Yeah, thank you. That was a really good response.
Yeah.
So,
Thank you.
question. Monsur, it was amazing presentation, and I followed your
Thanks, Sam.
progress, and really very happy to see where you are. I think you are a perfect example for our young folks. In fact, when we invited you for this talk, we wanted you to talk as an early career, but the advices that you gave were like a seasoned professional. So I was amazed. But I
Thanks,
got
Sam.
a question which is similar to Carter. Okay, just okay. Even though you gave a seasoned answer, so as a younger professional, as you guys know, the world is changing. A number of challenges, and people are looking at, both younger people and people who have been around international science. The future of science is international. It's always been that way. So as people are forced to look outward, what does your generation see as an opportunity as well as a challenge? So if you could talk from that angle, please. Thank you.
Yes, it's a very interesting question, Sam. I don't know if I can answer that, but I'll try to answer it.
Yes.
So I think first of all, our generation, they are like funding. First of all, many of our generation people, they are opting industry now than research, because what is still kind of, I don't know, I don't call it a problem, but a challenge is the work-life balance. Because when you are in academia, you need to, I think most of the researchers, they give more time or tend to, or it's an unwritten rule, but asked to give more time from their life than this 40 hours a week. And many of our current generation don't prefer to do that way. So that's why they are looking for more work-life balance, more stability. One of the bigger challenges is the stability, I think, at least in Europe for early career researchers. There is not that many, I think, junior professorship or assistant professorship positions. Particularly now, I think these tenure track positions are very rare in Europe, as I see. So many of them, they stay postdocs for, I don't know, 10 years, 12 years, and then they said, okay, that is not well stable enough. They want a better stable job and well-paying job in that same time. So many of them are moving toward industry, but many of them thriving in that. They really want to be a professor. They really want to carry forward in that. Whatever a better opportunity comes, it's one after another. If get rejection, apply for another one. Like I am in the same way. I have been trying to get a positions for last 7 years. So yeah, one after another.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Monsur.
Thank
We'll see
you.
All right.
Okay, we have a question from Dario.
Hi, Dario.
Yeah, Monsur. Yeah, so thanks for the talk. Now, one question, maybe a little bit a heretic one. You partially
Okay.
answered it. But I mean, one problem normally also is, in a way, how to get visibility. So to get out of the shadow of the group head you're working in without, let's say, stepping on his toes or things like that. I mean, one answer was that you gave already is like, do what your boss asks for, that you do the 40 hours, and then you put on the extra hours on the topics you like. But yeah, I mean, you've worked for many people. So maybe you have a suggestion on how one can do that you really, because at the end, I mean, what you said is you need to sell a story for a proposal. But part of the problem is also when you sell it, the reviewers need to believe that it's your story and not the one of the head of the lab. Because otherwise they say, okay, let's give the money to him.
Yeah, there is an answer. You know already my journey. You saw it
Yeah,
very
no,
closely.
I know the
It
answer.
was
That's
it
what
was, I think.
and also know that you found a way to do it in a nice way. We also know other cases where it didn't went that smoothly. Yeah, so
Actually, I have an example. Like in Clemson, in one of my friends' research group, there was a postdoc, and he said that I will work Monday to Wednesday on my professor's work, and Thursday and Friday only for my work. So basically, for Monday to Wednesday work that he is doing, he is kind of making his supervisor happy by producing enough results. But Thursday and Friday, he is doing only his work, which is helpful for his own grants, own work, basically. So at the end, it's kind of a time management. And I think be true to the project that you are working on. Of course, you have to deliver what your project or your PI is asking for, but on beyond that, you can do other things, because I believe you can be multitasking. Many of us, for example, even for our carbon materials, probably when you are waiting for your furnace to cool down, you can do something else. You can think of something else. But yeah, I think But I think, yeah, you can also put some extra time and then make it worth it.
Okay, yeah, thanks.
All right, I think that concludes today's session. So let's thank all the speakers, and maybe where's the clapping thing?
Can I do everything pleasantly?
Okay, yeah, we can clap. There was a clapping gesture here. I couldn't make it work. Yeah, here it works. So I think it's customary to take a group photo, right, Dr. Wang?
Yeah, a group photo, and then I have a QR code to share for everyone for
Okay.
the survey. So I don't know if you guys want to scan this and then we take a group photo. Just need as many people to fill it out as possible. This is the last day.
Before we conclude, I also want to extend my deepest thanks to all our speakers today and in the last 2 days for sharing their expertise, insights, and passion and career advice. Your contributions made this summer school truly inspiring summer school. And to all the audience, thank you for your questions, your active participation in the summer school, and continuous contribution to the MEMS community. So me and Sam, Mark, and Rodrigo, Nazi, as a organizing committee, and also with Matthew as a coordinator, we want to thank everyone.
So hopefully everyone got the QR code. I'll send it out in an email for everyone just in case.
Yes, please do so. Yeah, I mean, if you send an email.
Yeah. Okay, so it's group picture time. So if everyone could turn their cameras on.
Sam, this doesn't give you extra points on the working side. I guess it's more the work-life balance.
The picture says everything.
Exactly.
I'm going from one meeting to another meeting. I'm walking.
Okay.
Okay, Xian. Okay. 3, 2, 1, smile. Okay, perfect.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Have a great day, folks.
Bye.
Yeah, bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Congratulations, Monsur. Thank you.